Chapter 1 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Bear Family at Home and How the Circus Came to Visit Them. Once a little cub bear was caught in a big log trap and taken on a train to a circus. He lived in the circus a long, long while, and every day a great many people came to see the bear, and the lions, and the tigers, and the leopards, and the elephants, and the camels, and the other animals. Every night the animals would all be put in the wagons made for them. Then the wagons would be rolled on the flat cars of a railroad train. The train would go all night to another town, where a great many people would come to see the animals and the men and women in the circus. The cub bear saw a great many wonderful and strange things while he was in the circus and while travelling on the trains. Once he crossed the ocean in a great ship and came back again in another ship. This story tells how the little cub bear got back into the woods again. One night, after the wagons and the animals had all been put on board the cars, the fireman rang the bell, and the engineer started the train, and away it went, whistling and coughing down the track. The animals were so used to the train going rattlety-bang, all night long, that they all went to sleep, and remained asleep a long while. While the animals and everyone on the train, except the engineer and the fireman, were asleep, the engineer looked ahead and suddenly saw a big rock on the track. He blew the whistle, toot toot, to call the brakeman, and the brakemen ran as fast as they could and began to put on the brakes to stop the train. But the train came nearer and nearer to the big rock. The poor engineer couldn't stop the train, and the brakemen couldn't stop the train. So the engine ran into the rock and was knocked off the track and turned a somersault and was smashed all to pieces. And all the cars ran off the track into a ditch, and the wagons were all broken, so that the animals got out of their cages and found that they were free in the dark woods. They were all so glad to be free that they ran away as fast as they could and hid in the woods, all except the cub bear and a friend of his, a monkey named Jim. They ran a little way, and then the cub bear stopped and looked around. He saw a path. Then he looked at the trees and the mountain, and he thought he would wait there until morning. As soon as it was light, the cub bear looked way up on the mountainside and saw a cave. And where do you suppose they were? In the very same forest where the cub bear was born. They walked a little way, and the cub bear said, "Why, here is the path where little brother Jimmie Bear lost his foot in a trap." They ran up that path as fast as they could to the cave in the mountains. The cub bear's heart was beating very fast, pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat, because he knew that this was his old home, and he wondered whether his Papa Bear and Mama Bear and his little Susie Bear and little brother Jimmie Bear were still there. They went in very quietly and found a great big brown bear asleep. When the big brown bear heard them come in, he jumped up quickly and looked at little cub bear, and little cub bear looked at him. It was the Papa Bear. He ran to the cub bear and put his arms around him and gave him a great bear hug. You know bears can hug awfully tight. Papa Bear hugged the cub bear, and the cub bear hugged the Papa Bear, and they were very, very glad to see each other. The Papa Bear woke up the Mama Bear, and then the Mama Bear gave the cub bear a great bear hug because she was so glad to see him. Susie Bear waked up and gave the little cub bear a big bear hug. But Jimmie Bear was not there. Did you ever give your papa a bear hug? After the papa bear and the mama bear had talked a little while to the cub bear, they said, "We have something to show you." And they took the cub bear away back into the back part of the cave and showed him the sweetest, cutest little baby bear you ever saw in your life. And the papa bear said, "We call this little baby bear Cub Bear now, so we will have to call you Circus Bear after this." For the little cub bear had told his papa and mama that he had been in the circus while away. All this time, the monkey Jim had been sitting off by himself in the cave, watching the big bears. They were so big and strong that he was frightened. So he climbed up to the top of the cave, and there he stayed until the little cub bear waked up, and the circus bear didn't know where he had gone. After a while, the little wee cub bear waked up and saw the monkey, and said, "Oh, see that funny little man up there on the root? He has hair all over him, and he has a long tail, and he is making faces at me." He asked the circus bear what it was, and the circus bear said, "It is a monkey named Jim, a very dear friend of mine. Would you like to shake hands with him?" And the little cub bear said, "Yes." So the circus bear told the monkey not to be afraid, and the monkey came down and shook hands with the little wee cub bear, and they said that they would always be good friends. The very first thing this little cub bear did was to ask the monkey to tell him a story, for he was the greatest bear for stories you ever saw. He was always teasing his papa and his mama and everybody that came to the den to tell him a story. The monkey said, "All right, I will tell you a story about the time that I went to school." So that morning, when the papa and the mama bear and the circus bear and the little cub bear were sitting in the den, the monkey told his story. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Katie Francesca. Chapter 2 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis WILBUR. How the Monkey Went to School. Now, little cub bear, I am going to tell you about the time I went to school. The only time in my whole life that I went to school. The little cub bear said he had never been to school in his life, and he would like to hear the story. The monkey Jim said, "Well, one night when we were riding on the train, going from one town where the circus had been to another where they were going to give a show, I was riding in a wagon on one of the cars with a lot of other monkeys. The man who took care of the monkeys forgot and left a door open. A monkey named Joe and I climbed out through the open door and got on top of the wagon. And we just had a lot of fun, jumping around and playing with each other and pulling each other's hair and climbing down on the car. After we had played a long while, the train went into a covered bridge, and I said to Joe, 'Let's jump up and see if we can catch hold of one of those iron rods.' He said, 'All right,' and we gave a great jump, and we caught hold of an iron rod overhead. The train was going so fast that we almost missed the rod, but we hung on, and in a moment, when we looked down, what do you suppose had happened? The train had run out from under us, and there was nothing under us except the railway track and ties, and away down below them a deep, dark river. We were frightened, because it was very dark and very cold. We climbed down as fast as we could and walked across the ties until we came to the ground. There were a lot of trees near the track, and we ran over as quickly as we could and climbed a tree. But it was very, very cold. We hugged each other very tight and tried to keep warm, but it grew colder and colder and colder, until it seemed as though we would freeze. For you know we had always lived in a very warm country until we came to the circus. By and by, though, it commenced to get light, and when we looked over in the woods a little farther, we saw a little red schoolhouse. By and by, a man who took care of the little red schoolhouse came and opened the door and went inside. Pretty soon we saw the smoke coming out of the chimney, for the man had built a fire. Joe said to me, "Let's go down as quickly as we can and run over there and see if we can get warm by the fire." So we climbed down the tree and ran as fast as we could to the little red schoolhouse. There we found a window open a little way, and we climbed up and went inside the schoolhouse. The man wasn't looking, so we hurried over near the stove, and Joe climbed into one desk where a boy kept his books, and I climbed into another desk where a girl kept her books. The man looked around quickly, for he thought he heard something, but we kept so quiet that he didn't see us. By and by he closed the window, went out and shut the door, and there we were, locked up in that little red schoolhouse. But the fire was so nice and warm that we were glad to be there. Pretty soon Joe said, "Let's go out and see if we can find something to eat." So we got out and looked all over the building. We opened the drawer in the teacher's desk, and in it we found an apple that he had taken away from a little boy in school the day before. For you know that little boys are not allowed to have apples in school. I gave Joe the biggest part of the apple, and we ate it all up. And just as we had eaten it up, a great big boy came to the door and made such a noise that we scampered back and got into the desks. We stayed there, very quietly. Pretty soon another boy came, and then another, and then another, and then a girl came, and by all the scholars had come. Some of them were playing in the yard, and some of them in the room, and just then the teacher came. He rang the bell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, and the pupils came into the schoolroom and took their seats. Then the teacher struck a small bell, and the pupils sat up very straight and sang a song. Just then I reached out and grabbed the ear of the boy who was sitting in my seat and pulled it very hard. He screamed, "Ouch! Ouch!" And just then Joe reached out and pulled the hair of the girl that was sitting in his seat, and she screamed, "Ouch! Ouch!" The teacher pounded the desk and cried, "Order! Order!" The little boy thought it was the boy behind him that pulled his ear, and the little girl thought it was the girl behind her that pulled her hair. When everything was still again, the teachers told the boys and girls to take out their books. The boy reached in to get his book, and I bit his finger, and he yelled, "Ouch!" just as loud as he could, and jumped out of his seat. And the little girl reached in to get her book, and Joe bit her finger, and she yelled, "Ouch!" just as loud as she could, and jumped out. All the pupils looked over to see what was the trouble, but we kept very still, and the teacher came down quickly to find out what caused the trouble. He reached his hand into the desk quickly, and I grabbed hold of his hand and hung on. Then he jerked his hand out, and I came out with it, and I jumped on his shoulders and began to pull his hair, and Joe jumped out of his desk, and he jumped on the teacher's shoulders, and the teacher yelled and tried to hit us with a stick. And we jumped over onto the teacher's desk, and then we jumped over the pupils' heads. I jumped out the window, and Joe ran out the door. And as he ran out, he took one of the boys' dinner pails with him. They all screamed and yelled and ran after us as fast as they could. We ran over to a tree, and a couple of dogs saw us, and they barked and ran after us. The boys threw stones, but none of them could hit us, and pretty soon we got to a tree. We scampered up as fast as we could, and all the pupils and the teacher and the dogs came to the foot of the tree, and the dogs barked, and the boys yelled and threw stones, and the girls danced and shouted. The teacher had something that looked like a gun, but I think it was only a stick, because he didn't shoot at all. Just then, Joe reached into the dinner pail and he found a soft-boiled egg. He threw this down at the teacher and hit him right on top of his bald head. Then we scampered out on the branches and jumped into another tree, and then into another tree, and then into another tree, and pretty soon we had gone so far that they couldn't find us. Then we opened the dinner pail and we found a fine dinner. Some apples and nuts and bread and butter and a piece of pie. When we had eaten everything there was in the pail, we left the pail up in the tree and climbed down to the ground. Then we walked and we ran until we came to a town, and there was the circus tent, for this was the very town where the circus was going to show. We ran as fast as we could, and a lot of dogs got after us. They barked and barked, but we got away from all the dogs but one, because he could run faster than the others. He was a very little dog, and when he came close to us, Joe ran to one side of the road, and I ran to the other, and just as he got between us, we grabbed the dog by his tail and his ears, and pulled so hard that he just yelled, "Kiki! Kiki! Kiki!" and ran toward the tent as fast as he could. So we both jumped on his back and rode until we came to the tent. Then we jumped off and scampered into the tent under the canvas and found our wagon. The door was still open, and we got into the wagon, and there we went to sleep, for we had been up all night. "That is why I went to school," said the monkey. And the little bear cub said, "I will be glad when I am big enough to go to school." End of Chapter 2. Recording by Katie Francesca.
Chapter number 3 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lola, Janie. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The coming of the great big animal and how he helped the bear family. After the monkey had finished his story, Papa Bear and Mama Bear and the little cub bear were talking about the animals in the circus, and the little cub bear said, "I wonder where all those animals are." And the circus bear said, "Why, I think they're somewhere in the woods." Then the little cub bear said, "Maybe these animals will come to see us. I think it would be fine if we had a nice large cave big enough for all the animals." The mama bear said, "I think that would be nice." And the papa bear said, "That would be nice." And the little circus bear said, "I think that would be nice too." And the bear cub said, "Maybe we can have a bigger cave and have all the animals come and live with us." And just as he said it, they heard a rustling sound, as though something was coming up the path. The little cub bear ran to the mouth of the cave and said, "There is a very strange looking animal coming up the path. "It is the biggest animal I ever saw. It has a nose that reaches clear to the ground, and it has a thumb and finger on the end of its nose, and every once in a while it stops and picks up a piece of straw with the thumb and finger and puts it into its great mouth. It has teeth that are so long that they stick way out of its mouth. The teeth are as large as a small tree and look like great sharp horns growing out of its mouth, and its legs are as big around as a large stump. Its ears are as large as the mouth of this cave. It can move its nose around and scratches back with the thumb and finger on the end of its nose. It has no hair at all except on the end of its tail." Just then the animal made a tremendous noise, a sort of blowing and trumpeting sound. The circus bear said, "I know who that is. It is Jumbo, the elephant from our show. Ask him to come into the cave." Jumbo came to the mouth of the cave, and the little bear cub said to him very politely, "Come in, Mr. Jumbo." But of course, Jumbo could not come into the cave. It was too small. Mr. Jumbo said, "I would like to come into the cave and see the circus bear because he was very good to me when we were in the circus together." So the little cub bear said, "Try and see if you cannot make the mouth of the cave larger." Mr. Jumbo said, "I will try." So Mr. Jumbo commenced to dig with his great tusks and pull with his great trunk at the dirt and stones and the roots that were in the way, until the mouth of the cave was ever so much larger than it had been, but it was still too small for the elephant to get in. So the circus bear came to the mouth of the cave and told Jumbo how glad he was to see him. Mr. Jumbo took hold of the circus bear's foot with his trunk and shook it, just like two people shaking hands. He was so glad to see the bear that had been so good to get things for him when he was in the circus, for there he was tied to a stake by a great chain. That is the way they keep elephants with the circus, you know. When Mr. Jumbo found that he could not get into the cave, he said to the circus bear and to all the bears, "You know that the other animals are trying to find this cave, and as soon as they find it, they will want to live here, and we ought to get the cave ready for them." Then the papa bear said, "What do you think that we ought to do? Do you think that we could make the cave larger for all of the animals?" Mr. Jumbo said, "Well, I think the first thing we ought to do is to go down to the wreck of the train and get some of the things that we want from the wreck before the men come back and take everything away." All of the bears and the monkey thought that was the best thing they could do. They went down right away and found that all of the animals had gone, but there were lots of things they wanted to take up to the cave. Mr. Jumbo found the beautiful howdah that the circus man used to place on his back. A howdah, you know, is that big saddle they put on an elephant's back for the people to ride in. It was painted with red and yellow paint and had beautiful red plush cushions in it. It had a top to keep the sun off of anyone that was riding in the howdah on the elephant's back. The bears said that they could put the howdah on the elephant's back, but that they could not fasten it there, for they had no hands to buckle the straps with. Then the monkey said, "I can fasten the buckles with my hands, for you know that I have fingers just like a man, and a man buckles the straps by using his fingers." The papa bear and the mama bear, Susie bear, the circus bear, and the little cub bear lifted as hard as they could, but of course they could not lift the heavy howdah way up on Mr. Jumbo's back, for they were not tall enough. So Mr. Jumbo said, "I will kneel down, and then you will not have to lift so far, and I can help you with my trunk." So he knelt, and the bears all lifted at once, and Mr. Jumbo helped them with his trunk, and finally they got the howdah in the right place on his back. Then the monkey buckled the straps, and everything was ready to take the howdah up to the cave where the bears live. The papa bear said, "Let us fill the howdah with the things we want to take up to the cave." And they commenced to hunt for the things that they wanted, and what do you think they found? A great bass drum, so big that a little bear could get into it. And they also found a smaller drum and a fife and some big brass horns that belonged to the band. Then they found some harness that was used for the beautiful black and white horses that ran the chariot races. They put all of these things into the howdah. When the howdah was nearly full, the little cub bear asked his papa if he couldn't ride in the howdah. Mr. Jumbo heard the little cub bear ask, and he said it would be all right, because he was very strong and could carry a great deal more than they had put on his back. When the little cub bear climbed into the howdah, Mr. Jumbo straightened out his front legs to get up, and the little cub bear nearly tipped out of the rear end of the howdah. And then he straightened up his hind legs and stood up, and the little cub bear nearly fell out again. Just as they started up the hill, the monkey said, "You need a driver," and he grasped Mr. Jumbo's tail and climbed up the tail just as if he were going up a tree. Then he scampered along Mr. Jumbo's back, clear over the top of the howdah, until he sat right on top of Mr. Jumbo's head, just as the drivers do when they drive elephants. Then the monkey asked Mr. Jumbo to hand him a stick with a sharp hook in the end of it that the drivers use to guide the elephants with. Mr. Jumbo reached over with his long nose that had a thumb and finger on the end of it and picked up the stick and handed it to the monkey, for he knew the monkey was not strong enough to hurt him much. The monkey said very proudly, "Get up, Mr. Jumbo," and away they went to the bear's cave. When they got there, Mr. Jumbo knelt down and the little bear nearly tumbled out again. But he jumped out all right, and they took the howdah off Mr. Jumbo's back. The bears and monkey took everything out of the howdah and carried it into the cave. Then the animals all went back again to the place where the train was wrecked, to see if there was anything else they could get. This time they found a chariot that had 2 wheels, and it was all covered with gilt and with angels made of gold, and it was very, very beautiful. Mr. Jumbo said that if the bears and the monkey could hitch him to the chariot, they could fill it with things and take them up to the den. So they looked and finally found a harness that was used for the elephant. The monkey and the bears harnessed Mr. Jumbo to the chariot, and then they looked for things to put into the chariot. The monkey found the clothes that he used to wear in the circus, a pair of red trousers with a green coat, and a little red hat with a black feather in it, and he put them in the chariot. Mr. Jumbo found a bale of hay, but they all said that would have to wait until the next time, because there would not be room in the chariot for this bale of hay and the other things they wanted to take up. They found the little drum that the monkey used to play on the circus and put that in the chariot. Then they found a lot of biscuits that the dog in the circus had to eat, and they put these in the chariot too, and soon the chariot was full. The little bear cub thought there was just room enough for him to ride in the chariot, and he asked Mr. Jumbo if he could ride. And as soon as Mr. Jumbo said yes, he climbed in on top of things in the chariot, and they all started up to the cave. They had not gone very far before the monkey got hold of Mr. Jumbo's tail and scampered up to his place on the top of Mr. Jumbo's head. They soon reached the cave, and there they unhitched Mr. Jumbo and left the chariot and all the things in it, and went back to the train wreck, because they knew that there was another chariot there, even more beautiful than this one. And when they reached the wreck again, Mr. Jumbo went over to where the big bale of hay was. And how do you suppose he carried the bale of hay? He knelt down and he ran his great teeth, called tusks, under the bale of hay. Then he wrapped his long nose, or trunk as it is called, around the bale of hay, and stood up and carried the hay over and put it in the chariot. Then he went for 2 more bales in the same way and placed them in the chariot. The monkey then hitched Mr. Jumbo to the chariot, and they again started up the hill. In this way they hauled 2 or 3 loads of hay, and then they unhitched Mr. Jumbo and left the chariot up near the bear's cave. Then the bears, the monkey, and the elephant went back to the wreck, and each one carried everything he could. The bears got their arms full and walked all the way up to the den on their hind legs. The monkey got his little arms full of what do you suppose? Bags of roasted peanuts. The elephant carried up 3 great sacks filled with barley. They worked so hard that it took them nearly all day. That night, as they were wondering whether any of the animals would find the cave in the dark, they suddenly heard the flapping of wings. The little cub bear ran at once to the mouth of the cave to see what it was. "Oh, Circus Bear," he said, "here is a great bird. He has great big eyes as large as marbles. He has the funniest pointed ears. He has a hooked nose. He has great claws, and he is as big as half a dozen doves." The circus bear said, "That is Mr. Owl. Ask him to come in." So the little bear cub said to Owl very politely, "Come in, Mr. Owl," and the owl came into the den. He blinked his great eyes and looked solemn and wise, and the little cub bear said, "Mr. Owl, we are going to build a house so that all the animals can come and live with us if they want to, and we want to know if you can help us build the house." And Mr. Owl said very solemnly, "I would be very glad to help you, because when we lived in the circus, your brother was very good to me, and I should like to do anything I can to help you." The little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the owl said, "If you want me to, I can be doorkeeper, and when anyone comes, I can ask who he is, because, you know, I can say, 'Who, who.'" The little cub bear danced up and down and said that it would be very fine. And he said, "I am very glad that my brother was kind to you when you were in the circus." So the owl went out to the mouth of the den, and there was a great big tree, and away up near the top of the tree was a long limb sticking out like an arm. And the owl flew up to this limb and sat there, looking very solemn and very wise, as all owls do, blinking his great eyes. And there he sat day and night, winking and blinking his great eyes, so solemn and wise, keeping watch for the bears and the animals, just like a soldier's sentry standing guard at the general's tent. Now the little cub bear, like all little cubs, was very fond of stories, and was always teasing the papa bear to tell him stories about little bears and all sorts of things. The little bear liked the stories that his papa told him about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa. That night, after the owl had flown up to the limb of the dead tree, the little fellow said, "Papa, please tell me another story about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa." The papa bear said, "Little one, you are always asking me to tell you stories. It is hard for me to think of so many, but if you want me to do so, I will tell you of." End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Zarina Silverman, Los Angeles, California. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 4. The Little Cub Bear That Would Not Mind His Papa, and How He Took an Unexpected Bath. This little cub bear that would not mind his papa was a tame little bear that lived with his papa near a great sawmill. You know what a sawmill is? It is a place where they take great pine trees that have been chopped down and cut up into logs, and saw the logs into boards and shingles and lumber to make houses for men to live in with their little cubs that they call boys and girls, and their little wee cubs they call babies. This sawmill was on a great river, and near the sawmill was a place where the water fell straight down from a place higher than this house, and of course the stream ran very swiftly above the falls and below the falls. These falls were not so large as the Niagara Falls, but they were so large that the water poured over with a great roaring sound, and the water whirled about after it reached the bottom of the falls, and great waves dashed up against the banks of the river. Above the falls, the water ran so swiftly that no one could swim in it. The papa bear knew this, But the little cub bear that would not mind his papa didn't know that the water ran so swiftly. The papa bear had told his little son many, many times not to go too near the river and never to try to drink out of the river above the falls. But one day the little fellow was very, very thirsty, and he ran up to the bank of the river and saw the beautiful cool water and thought how nice it would be to have a drink. He was so thirsty, he didn't want to go away down below the falls where he and his papa usually took a drink of water, so he thought he would see if he couldn't get a drink right where he was, there above the falls. He went down to the very edge and reached way over and began to lap up the water, and oh, how good it was! Just then he heard a noise, and as he looked up quickly, his foot slipped, and into the river he went kersplash! Now this little bear could swim. That is one reason he wasn't afraid to drink from the river, because he thought if he fell in, he could swim out very easily and very quickly. So he started to swim as hard as he could for the shore, but he soon found that the water was so swift that instead of getting nearer the shore, he was getting farther and farther away all the time. And then he looked around to see where he was going. He found that he was going nearer and nearer to the falls, where the water went over with such a great roar. So he swam harder and harder and harder and faster and faster and faster, but all the time he was going closer and closer to the terrible falls. Finally, the little bear gave up trying to swim out and just kept his nose out of the water so that he could breathe, and down the stream he went faster than you could run. Sometimes great waves would cover him up completely, and when his nose would come up above the water, he would blow almost like a whale to get the water out of his nose. Almost before you could think, that little bear came to the edge of the falls, and over he went. Do you think that was the last of him? Well, if he had been a little boy, I suppose he would have been drowned. But this little cub bear was so light and so strong that after a long, long while, he came up to the surface of the water right in the middle of a great whirlpool. He went round and round and round in the water, and it seemed as though he never would stop. But finally, he found a big log that had come over the falls, and he got one foreleg over the log and swam as hard as he could toward the bank, and finally succeeded in getting ashore. There he lay on the grass, all wet and tired out, and all he could think was, "I am so glad I wasn't drowned. I will never again disobey my papa." And he thought this over and over in his mind. Soon the little cub bear that would not mind his papa went to sleep right where he was, for he was too tired to go home. After a long while, his papa began to look for him, and finally found him lying there all wet and sound asleep. His papa knew what had happened, but he felt so bad he didn't waken the little bear, but picked him up in his great arms and carried him back to the den and laid down close beside him to keep him warm. And the little fellow slept all that night and all the next day until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he wakened and put his arm around his papa and said, "Oh, I had the most terrible dream in the whole world. I thought I was nearly drowned, and I was too tired to get home." And the papa bear said, "I guess that wasn't a dream, but I'm so glad that you are alive that I'm not going to scold you for disobeying me." When this story about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa was finished, our little cub bear, who lived away up in the cave in the mountain, said, "I should think that every little bear ought to mind his papa and do just as he says, else they might get drowned, you know." Then the little bear went off to bed and to sleep. The next morning, early, the little cub bear got up and rubbed his eyes with his paws instead of washing them as little boys do. Just then he heard a noise as if some animal was coming, and he ran to the mouth of the den and looked out and said, "I see the queerest looking animal coming up the path. It has long ears and a great big mouth and a queer looking tail. It looks something like a horse, but still it looks different from a horse." And just then the owl saw the animal and said, "Hoo, hoo." And the animal answered, "Hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw." And the circus bear said, "I know who that is. That's a mule. Her name is Jenny." Just then, Jenny came to the mouth of the den, and the little cub bear said very politely, "Come in, Mrs. Jenny." And she came into the den, and the little cub bear said, "Mrs. Jenny, we're going to try to build a house big enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. Can you help us?" Then Mrs. Jenny said, "I would be very glad to, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And Jenny said, "I haven't worked for a long while, but I can kick like everything." The little cub bear said, "Well, here's a soft place in the rock. Perhaps if you will kick, it will fall down and make more room." And Jenny turned around and kicked the rock, and it fell down. And she kicked, and more rocks fell down. And she kicked, and more rocks fell down. And she kept on kicking, and more rocks fell down. And the bears picked up the rocks and carried them out. And when she got through, there was a nice large room. And the little cub bear said, "We will call this Jenny's room. I am very glad that my brother was good to Mrs. Jenny when she was in the circus, because if he hadn't been, maybe she would have kicked me instead of the rocks." That day, the bears worked hard all day trying to find enough to eat for themselves and for all of the animals that were coming to see them from the circus. The circus bear told them just what things the animals liked to eat. So the papa bear and Susie bear went one way, and the mama bear went another. The elephant looked all over the mountain to see if he could find some grass to eat. That night, when the animals came to the cave, the elephant told them that he thought he had found a fine place for the animals that liked to eat grass. He said there were a great many horses where he found the grass, but that they said they were not going to come with him because they did not want to live in a cave. They said they wanted to live out in the open air, and that if anyone came to take them back to the circus, they would run away as fast as they could. The bears were very tired that night, but the little cub bear teased his papa for a story about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa. Finally, the papa bear said that he would tell just one story if the cub bear would promise that he would not ask for another one and would go to bed as soon as the story was finished. So the little cub bear and Susie bear came as close as they could to the papa bear, and he told this story. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. How little cub bear that would not mind his papa was nearly drowned among the logs. Just on the edge of the stream which flowed by the sawmill where the little cub bear that would not mind his papa lived, there was a pond of still water, and in this pond there were a great many logs that floated down from the forest away up the river. These logs were in this pond waiting to be sawed up into boards and timber to be used in building houses. Now, this was a very dangerous place for little boys, and for little bears. The papa bear had told his little son never to go out on the logs, and the little fellow had promised that he never would go out on the logs. But day after day, the little cub bear saw men going out on the logs with long sticks that had big spikes in the end of them, and long sticks with hooks on the end of them, and they pushed the logs here and there to bring them over to the sawmill, where they were hoisted into the mills by great chains, and then were moved over in front of a great saw to be sawed into lumber. As the little cub bear watched these men every day, he would think how easy it was, and how nice it was to ride around on those logs, and to step from one log to another, and how foolish his papa was to tell him not to go down on the logs, when it was so easy. One day, after watching the men for a long while, the little cub bear thought he would go down very, very carefully and walk out on one of the logs. And this he did. There he waited for a long while, sitting on the log. It was great fun and didn't hurt at all. So finally he stepped over onto another log and then onto another. My, how he enjoyed it! The little bear felt sure that his papa had made a great mistake in telling him to keep off the logs. Just then, as the little bear stepped from one log to another, both logs rolled, and down he went into the water. But he didn't mind that much, because he could swim very well. The little bear swam to the surface as quickly as he could, but instead of getting his head out of the water, he bumped his head into the logs, for the surface of the water was all covered with floating logs. Then the little bear saw why his papa had told him never to play on the logs, because if he once fell into the river, he was very apt to be drowned. The little cub bear didn't give up and drown like that. He began to swim as hard as he could and held his breath as long as he could. And after he had swum just as far as he possibly could, he came up to the surface again. And this time his nose came out between two logs, and there was just room enough for his nose to get up out of the water, so he had a chance to breathe again. And oh, how good it seemed! And he took such long, deep breaths, and it seemed as though he could never get enough air. Then he thought he would see if he couldn't find a way out, and he tried and tried, but there wasn't room between the logs for his head to come up out of the water. He couldn't even get his eyes above the surface of the water, and so he couldn't see where he was. Pretty soon the logs began to move closer and closer together, and then he knew if he stayed where he was, he would surely be killed. So he took a long breath, just as deep a breath as he could. Can you take a long, deep breath, little cub bear? And the little cub bear said, Yes, Papa. And he took a long, deep breath to show his papa how the little bear breathed when he just had his nose above the water. Then the little bear dropped down again under the water, and he swam as hard and fast as he could, hoping that the next time he came up, he might possibly find another place where he could breathe. He knew that if he did not, he surely would be drowned and would never see his papa again. When the little cub bear came up, he found a place just big enough for his nose, and again he took a very long breath and waited until the logs began to come together again. Then he dropped down and swam under the logs. And as he was swimming, he could feel the logs scrape his back, and he knew that he was still under the great log raft. Finally, just as he had to breathe anyway, whether he breathed water and drowned, or breathed air and lived, he saw a little light place under the water where the light shone down between the logs, and he swam to the surface. And this time his whole head came out of the water, and he got a deep breath of fresh air, and another, but he couldn't get out. He stayed there, and pretty soon he found that the logs were moving apart just a little bit at a time, so that his head could come up farther and farther. And finally he got his whole back out of the water. Then the logs moved so that the little bear was able to crawl clear out of the water, and there he lay on the logs, tired out, and it was a long, long time before he could move or walk or do a thing. He was terribly frightened, but after a while he managed to walk clear to the shore on the logs, and he was very careful not to fall in the water again. He walked home and lay down and went to sleep. His papa came home after a while with something to eat for supper. He shook the little bear, but the little bear was so tired he didn't wake up, and so his papa let him sleep all night. When the papa bear had finished telling his little cub the story about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa, he said, "Little cub bear, what do you think of this story?" And our little cub bear scratched his head and thought quite a long while, and then he said, "I think it is best to try again, and not to give up too easily, or you might get drowned." The papa bear said, "I think so too, little cub bear. Now run to bed and go to sleep." So the little bear went to bed and went to sleep. During the night he seemed to be dreaming. He moved his paws just as though he was swimming, and then he snorted like a whale and took long, deep breaths. Then he moved his paws again. Then he breathed deep breaths again, and finally he sighed a great sigh and slept quietly. The little bear was dreaming about something. Can you guess what it was? The next morning, the little cub bear waked up early and wondered if any other animal would come from the circus. He rubbed his eyes and listened. Just then, he heard a sound of small hoofs pattering along the path. The little cub bear ran to the mouth of the cave and looked down to see what it was, and he saw something white. He said, "I see something coming up the path. It looks something like a sheep, but has long straight horns, and it has a beard and long straight hair." Just then the owl saw the animal and said, "Woo, woo." And the animal answered, "Baa, baa." And the circus bear said, "I know who that is. That's Billy the goat." And just then the goat came to the mouth of the den, and the little cub bear said very politely, "Come in, Mr. Goat." And the goat came in, and he looked around and saw the circus bear and the big bears. The little cub bear said to him, "Mr. Goat, we are going to try to build a house large enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay." And the goat said, "I will be very glad to help you in any way I can, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the goat said, "I don't know. I can butt like everything." And then the little cub bear said, "Well, there is a very soft place in the ground. Perhaps you can knock some of the dirt and rocks down so we can carry it out and make more room." And then the goat said, "All right." And he butted, and he butted, and he butted, and knocked down more dirt, and they carried it out. And he kept on, and butted, and butted, and butted. And when he got through butting, there was a fine large room. And the cub bear said, "Thank you. We will call this room Billy's room. I am very glad that my brother was good to Billy when he was in the circus, because if he hadn't been, maybe Billy would have butted me instead of the rocks." The animals worked hard all that day trying to make the cave bigger. They scratched and dug the dirt and the rocks and worked as hard as they possibly could, for they were sure that soon the animals would be there and the cave would not be large enough. At night they all sat down and rested, and just as soon as the papa bear was seated, the little cub bear ran over to him and asked for another story about the little cub bear that would not mind his papa. The papa bear was very tired, but he loved the dear little cub, and so he began the story. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of the Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The little cub bear that would not mind his papa. A sawmill, you know, is a very dangerous place for any little bear to play, because there are so many saws and knives and wheels whirling around in every direction. This little bear, you remember, lived near a sawmill and belonged to his papa, who belonged to the man that owned the mill. The papa bear told the little bear not to touch anything in the sawmill, for if he did, he would be sure to be hurt. The little bear said that he would not touch a single thing, for he didn't want to be hurt any more than his papa wanted him to be hurt. So the papa bear said that he would rather that his little bear would stay away from the mill. But the little bear teased so hard that finally the papa bear told him he could go into the mill if he would be sure not to touch a single thing. The little bear said that he would be very careful. So Papa Bear let him go into the sawmill, where all of the wheels were going around and around. My, how the little bear did enjoy the mill! The great wheels and saws were going around so fast with a whirr and a whirr and a buzz, buzz. The great saws looked like shining wheels, and they went around so quickly that you could not see their teeth at all. A big log would come up to the saw on a sort of a carriage, and then buzz, buzz. The saw would go clear through the big log from one end to the other, and before the little bear could think, the log would be made into boards. At first the little bear was very careful, for he remembered what his papa had told him. But after a while the little bear went close to the biggest saw in the whole mill and watched it go through the logs. Now you know that bears always smell of a thing when they want to know what it is. So this little bear said to himself, "Papa did not tell me not to smell of the saw. He told me not to touch it. I think that I will smell of this wonderful thing that eats through the logs and makes them into boards." He went closer and closer. He was a little afraid even to smell of the saw after all that his papa had told him, but he went closer and closer to the saw until finally he reached out as far as he could with his nose to smell. Ouch! 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 The awfullest howling and squealing that you ever heard from a little bear. The papa bear ran in as fast as he could, and what do you think he saw? The poor little bear's face was all covered with blood, and he was howling and screaming as hard as he could. You see, the little bear could not see the teeth of the great saw, for they were going around so fast, and he had put his nose too close, and the saw had sawed the end of his nose right in two. Well, the poor papa bear was very, very sorry. He licked the blood off the little bear's face and took him over to the house that the man had made for them. After a long time the little bear went to sleep, but his nose hurt so badly that he awoke in the night many times. The next morning the little bear said to his papa, "Papa, I am sorry that I didn't obey you. You knew best, you always do, and I'll try not to be a bad little bear again." The papa bear said, "That's right, my little one. I am sorry that you were so badly hurt. I will not scold you, for I am sure that you have learned it is really best to do what papa tells you to do, and not to do the things that your papa tells you not to do." The little bear said, "I have, papa." What do you suppose they called the little bear after that? They called him the split-nosed bear. When the papa bear had finished the story, he said to the cub bear, "What do you think of that story?" And the little cub bear answered, "I think that it is best to do what papa says." Then the papa bear said, "That is right. Now you must run back into the cave and go to sleep." That night the little cub bear dreamed a bad dream. I do not know what it was, but he spoke aloud in his sleep and said, "I am always going to mind my papa." And then he felt the end of his nose with his paw. Can you guess what he was dreaming about? The next morning the little cub bear wakened very early and rubbed his eyes and wondered whether any of the animals would come from the circus. He listened and listened. Pretty soon he heard a very faint little patter, as if made by very small feet, and the cub bear listened and listened, and then he went to the door and looked out, and he said, "I see a very strange animal coming. He has the shortest little legs. He is smaller than a very small dog, about as large as 2 cats, and he has a funny little sharp nose, and he has black and white stripes down his back." Just then the owl saw the animal, and he said, "Who? Who?" But the animal didn't answer him. He came right along to the mouth of the den. Just as he reached there, the circus bear said, "I know who that is. That is Mr. Badger. Ask him to come in." So the little cub bear said very politely, "Come in, Mr. Badger," and the badger came in. The cub bear said, We are going to try to build a house large enough for all the animals, so that if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. Can you help us?" And the badger said, "I would be very glad to help you if I could, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the badger said, "I can dig a round hole, just as big around as I am, and dig very fast." And the little cub bear said, "That is nice. Perhaps you can make us a chimney. Here is a place in the side of the den where there is nothing but earth and dirt." He took the badger over and showed him, and the badger said, "Yes, I can make you a fine chimney." So he commenced to scratch, and he scratched very fast, digging up instead of down, and he scratched, and the first thing you know, when the little cub bear looked, he didn't see any badger, but he saw the dirt falling out of the hole where the badger was, and the badger scratched, and more dirt came down. First thing you knew, no more dirt came down, but the little cub bear went and looked up the hole, and he could see clear out to the blue sky. Just then they heard a patter at the door, and there was Mr. Badger. He had made a hole clear out into the open air, a nice chimney, and he came in and sat down with the other animals. That day the animals all worked as hard as ever, and at night when the papa bear sat down to rest, the little cub bear ran over to him and said, "Papa, please tell me another story about the little split-nosed bear that would not mind his papa." "All right," said the papa bear. "I will, if you will promise me to go to bed as soon as I have finished." The little cub bear said, "I will, papa." So the papa bear told him. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisabeth, Holland. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 7. The Story of the Little Split-Nosed Bear That Would Not Mind His Papa. You remember that the little bear that had his nose split by the great circular saw lived with a man who owned a large sawmill. For a long time after the little bear had his nose sawed in two, he kept away from the mill. He said to himself, "I will never go in that mill to be hurt again, and I will mind my papa," for his papa had told him to keep out of the sawmill. But one day the little split-nosed bear was playing with a dog that belonged to the man who owned the sawmill. They were having a fine time playing bear hunt. The little split-nosed bear was playing the bear, and the little dog was playing that he was a big bloodhound dog running after the bear. The dog was really a very small dog, white with brown ears and a stub tail. You see, he lived in a sawmill too. The little split-nosed bear would growl, "Growl! Growl!" and the little dog would run away as if he was terribly frightened. Then the dog would run after the little split-nosed bear and bark, and he could bark very, very loud for so small a dog. Bow, wow, wow! Bow, wow, wow! Then the little split-nosed bear would run away just as if he was terribly frightened. Then the little split-nosed bear would hide, and it would take the dog a long time to find him. They were having a splendid time jumping around and running in and out of the dark places when the little split-nosed bear ran into the sawmill, for he was playing so hard that he forgot all about the saw and what his papa had told him. The little dog was so close to the little split-nosed bear that the little bear ran as fast as he could and jumped up onto an iron platform that looked just as if it were made on purpose for a little bear to jump up on. And there the little split-nosed bear stood looking down at the dog and growling at him. The little dog jumped up as far as he could and bit the split-nosed bear on his heel. Then the little split-nosed bear whirled around like a flash, and what do you suppose happened? Ouch! 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 and such growling and howling and squealing you never heard. Then the little dog ran away as fast as he could, for he was really frightened this time. "Ki-yi, ki-yi, ki-yi," he howled as he ran out of the door. The Papa Bear heard the noise. He was afraid that the split-nosed bear was really killed this time, so he ran as fast as he could to the little bear, and what do you suppose he saw? There was the little split-nosed bear rolling about on the floor, and up on the iron platform where he had been playing was a little brown bear's ear. Oh, how sorry the Papa Bear felt to think his poor little bear had lost his ear, just because he had forgotten to do as his papa had told him to do. You see, the little split-nosed bear had been standing on the iron platform of a bandsaw. What he thought was a strap whirling around two wheels was really a saw. When the split-nosed bear had turned around quickly, his ear had come against the saw, and it was sawed off quicker than you could think, with a zip and a buzz. The Papa Bear licked the stump of the ear and said, "I am so sorry, dear little split-nosed bear, that you forgot and did not mind your papa." As soon as he could talk, the little split-nosed bear said, "I'll always mind my papa after this." The Papa Bear put him to bed, but his ear hurt, so that he wakened several times in the night. After the little split-nosed bear got well, they always called him the little one-eared bear that would not mind his papa. "This is the end of my story about the little split-nosed bear," said the Papa Bear as he finished. "Now, little cub bear, run to bed in the back of the cave and go to sleep as quickly as you can." The little cub bear ran quickly to bed and went to sleep in the dark alone, for he wanted to be a brave little bear. But after he had been sleeping a while, he talked in his sleep and said, "I am always going to mind my papa." Then he felt of his ear and moaned. Can you guess what the little cub bear was dreaming about? The next morning, the little cub bear wakened very early, and as soon as he had rubbed his eyes, he wondered if any of the animals would come that day. He listened. The circus bear listened, and Susie Bear listened. Pretty soon they heard something coming up the path, and the little cub bear rushed to the mouth of the den to see what it was, and he said, "I see a very strange animal coming up the path. It has the most beautiful fur I ever saw, ever so much finer than bear's fur. And the animal looks something like Mr. Badger, only its fur is all one color, and it has the funniest tail, almost as big as a shovel, flat and broad." Just then the owl saw the animal and said, "Hoo, hoo." But the animal didn't answer at all, except he gave 2 slaps with his broad flat tail on the ground. And the circus bear said, "I know who that is. That is Mr. Beaver. Ask him to come in." Mr. Beaver came to the door, and the little cub bear said very politely, "Come in, Mr. Beaver." The beaver came in, and the little cub bear said, "We are going to try to build a house big enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. Can you help us?" And the beaver said, "I will be very glad to, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." The little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the beaver said, "I can build dams across streams so as to make beautiful lakes, such as they have in parks. And I can build a nice round house in the lake to live in, and large enough for a little bear to live in, if he can only get inside without getting wet." And the cub bear said, "That would be fine, because we could have a park for the animals to play in, and some of the animals would rather live in the water anyway than live in a cave." So the beaver said, "All right, I will make you a dam and a beautiful lake." So they all went down to the stream, and the beaver went up to a tree, and he commenced to bite it. He bit, and he bit, and he bit, and the chips just flew. And he bit, and he bit, and he bit, and the chips just flew. And the first thing they knew, the tree fell over. Then he went to another tree. Not a very large tree, only about so thick, 3 inches. Then he went to another tree, and he bit, and he bit, and bit, and the first thing they knew, that tree fell over. So he kept on until he had cut down a great many trees, and then he took them down and put them in the stream, and he put in leaves, and then the water began to rise higher and higher, and the beaver kept piling in leaves and trees, and soon he had a high dam clear across the stream. The next morning, when they looked, the water had filled up above the dam and made a beautiful lake. Soon the beaver went to work and made a house out of mud. He used his 4 feet like hands, walking on his hind feet, and he used his flat tail to make a beautiful mud house, big enough to live in himself, and big enough for little Cub Bear to get in, if he could only get in without getting wet. "Could you make so nice a mud house?" And the little Cub Bear said, "Thank you, Mr. Beaver," very politely. "I am very glad my brother was good to Mr. Beaver in the circus." As soon as they had seen the dam built by the beaver, all of the animals began to work again as hard as they could work to make the cave larger, because it was much too small for the animals that were already there, and the elephant could not get in at all. At night they were all very tired, but as soon as the Papa Bear sat down, the little Cub Bear ran over and got as close as he could to his papa and asked him to tell another story about the little one-eared bear that would not mind his papa. So although he was very tired, the Papa Bear began the story of End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisabeth, Holland. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 8. The One-Eared Bear That Would Not Mind His Papa. You remember that the little bear had promised that he would not go into the sawmill at all. But one day the little one-eared bear was very lonesome. He wanted to go into the mill, but he remembered that his papa had told him again that very morning that he must be sure to keep away from the sawmill. He thought a while, and then he said to himself, "Papa didn't tell me to keep out of the planing mill. I think that I will go in there." Now, the planing mill was just as bad a place for little bears as the sawmill itself, and the little one-eared bear knew this. But you see, he wanted to go in, and so he went in anyway. What do you suppose happened to the one-eared bear this time? He played for a while and had a very fine time. He enjoyed it so much that he said he would come again. He liked to see the wheels go round and round with a whiz and whir. Just then the little one-eared bear saw a funny machine with a thing buzzing around that looked like a roller, such as a cook uses to roll out cookies with. The little bear said, "I want to feel the wind that must be made by this roller going so fast, but I'll not get close enough to touch the thing, for I might get hurt, and I don't want to get hurt again." So the little one-eared bear reached out his paw very carefully, closer and closer. Ouch! 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 Such howling and squealing you never heard. What do you think happened? The little one-eared bear had touched the sharp knives or planes that whirl round and round in a planer. You see, they go around so fast that you cannot see them at all, for they look just like a solid roller. Well, the poor little one-eared bear's foot was bleeding and looked terrible. The Papa Bear heard the little one-eared bears howling and ran into the mill as fast as he could. And there he saw that the little one had lost all the toes of one foot. The Papa Bear licked the little one's foot and did everything that he could to make his little bear feel better, but he could not put back those poor little toes. The little one-eared bear was very, very sorry, too. Once he whimpered and told his papa that he was ever so sorry that he had not done as his papa had told him to do, and said that he would never, never again do anything that his papa told him not to do. But that didn't make his toes grow again. The little one-eared bear went to bed that night, but he didn't sleep very well because his foot hurt him so much. After a long while the foot healed so that the little bear could walk around, but he always limped as long as he lived. He said that he could never again forget to do as his papa told him to do, because every step that he took he remembered that foot and how he had lost all his toes by not doing as his papa told him. After that, they didn't call the little bear the little one-eared bear anymore. They always called him, what do you suppose? The clubfoot bear. When the little cub bear's papa had finished telling the story of the little one-eared bear, the little cub bear said, "I think that it is best to do what papa says." And the papa bear said, "That's right, dear little cub. Now run back into the cave and go to sleep." The little cub bear ran quickly to the back part of the cave, where it was all dark, and went to bed on some roots and brush, and was soon asleep. When he was fast asleep, he talked in his sleep and said, "I am always going to do what my papa tells me to do." And then he felt one of his paws and moaned, a sad little moan. Can you guess what the little cub bear was dreaming about? The next morning the beaver and the owl and the monkey were talking together, and the beaver said, "I am going down to live in that beautiful mud house that I made yesterday in the lake. The house has several rooms inside, and the door is under the water. I can swim out there and then dive under the water and come up inside the house. No one could find me in there. When I am swimming around in the lake or working on the dam, if I see anyone coming, I will jump into the water and hit the water 2 great slaps with my tail." And the monkey said, "Yes, I know how that sounds. That sounds just like a gun." The owl said as soon as he saw anyone coming, he would say, "Hoo, hoo." And the monkey said that he thought he would go out every morning and see if he couldn't find some of the animals and bring them up to the cave and see if they would like to live there in the cave, if it could be made big enough for them. So the beaver went down to the dam to work, and the monkey went out to see if he could find any of the animals, and the old owl flew up into the tree and sat out on the end of a dead limb and waited. Before very long, the little cub bear heard bang, bang. He knew the beaver had seen some animal coming and had struck the water with his tail. So he ran to the mouth of the cave to see what it was. Soon he heard a rustling noise and looked down the path. "I see a large animal coming," he said. "He looks very fierce. He is as large as a large bear, but he is yellow all over and has long shaggy hair all over his head and beautiful large eyes and a long tail with a tassel on the end of it." Just then the owl saw this animal and said, "Hoo, hoo." The animal opened his mouth and gave the most awful roar, 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 roar you ever heard. It frightened the little cub bear so that he didn't stop to hear what the circus bear said or find out what kind of an animal it was at all. But he ran clear back in the very back of the cave into Jenny's room, and there he waited, almost frightened to death. As soon as the little cub bear got over his fright, he noticed the air blowing through a crack. It seemed to come right out of the mountain. He did not understand and thought he would ask his brother about it. Just then the circus bear said, come out, little cub bear. Don't be afraid. The animal is a lion, and he won't hurt you because he is a tame lion and is a very good friend of mine." So the little cub bear came out and went to the mouth of the cave, just in time to meet the lion and the monkey, and he said very politely, "Come in, Mr. Lion." And the lion came in, and the little cub bear said, "We are going to try to build a house big enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. Can you help us?" And the lion said, "I would be very glad to help you if I could, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the lion said, "I don't know. I never built a house, because I always lived in the jungle, where there are lots of trees and grass, and we found our houses already built, just like your den. But I will do anything you want me to. I can jump ever so far." And the little cub bear said, "That is nice. Let's see how far you can jump." Then the papa bear and the mama bear and the little cub bear and the monkey all went out to see how far the lion could jump. The owl flapped his great wings and said, "Tu-whit, tu-whit, tu-whit." The lion crept away. Then he said, "Now I will show you how I catch things to eat." And he pointed to a log of wood 10 or 15 feet away, and he said, "I will show you what I would do if that log were a deer." The lion crouched and lay as still as a little mouse, and the bears were all still, waiting to see what the lion would do. There was not a sound in the forest. Suddenly, little cub bear saw a yellow flash through the air and heard a thud. Then he looked at the log of wood, and there was the lion on the log with his claw stuck into it. And the little cub bear said, "My, I am glad I am not a deer, and that the lion does not want me for his dinner." The animals worked all morning trying to make the cave larger, but the papa bear went off with little Susie bear to see what they could find to eat. When dinner time came, the animals all rested for a while. As they were sitting there talking, little cub bear said to the lion, "Mr. Lion, I wish you would tell me a story about the most narrow escape you ever had in your life." End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of the Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. Salem, Las Vegas, Nevada. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The lion's story of his most narrow escape. "Well," said the lion, "you know I used to live in Africa and used to eat deer and other animals. You remember I showed you this morning how I would catch deer? Well, one night it was very dark, and I climbed up on a bank, and there I waited. I could not hear a sound. Everything was just as still as could be. Suddenly, a long way off, I heard a sound as if an animal was moving. Below the bank there was a path that the animals took when they went to get water, and it seemed to me that this animal was coming along the path and would soon be right under the place where I was waiting. I watched, and the animal came nearer and nearer and nearer, but it was very dark, and I couldn't see a thing, and I was very sure, anyway, that it was a deer, and that I could have him for my supper. The animal came nearer and nearer, and finally I gave a great leap, and what do you suppose I landed upon? The back of a rhinoceros. You know, a rhinoceros has a skin almost as hard as iron, and right on the end of his nose 2 horns, very sharp. If I had landed on those horns, it surely would have killed me. The rhinoceros was terribly frightened, and so was I. He snorted and roared, almost like a locomotive. I tried to dig my claws into his back, but I couldn't get through his tough hide at all. It was just like trying to scratch a locomotive. He jumped and rolled over and hurt my foot, and I found I couldn't move because he had one of his great feet on my claws. Then the lion pointed to his claw and showed how it was all bent and twisted and scarred, and said, "That is where the rhinoceros stepped on my foot." Finally, the rhinoceros grew so angry that he put his tongue out. I reached up and bit a hole clear through his tongue, and then he ran away as fast as he could, and I ran away as fast as I could, but I had to run on 3 feet. And that is the end of my story. The little cub bear looked at the lion, and then he looked at the lion's lame foot, and then he scratched his head and said, "I think it is a good plan to look before you leap." And the lion said, "I wish somebody had told me that a long time ago." After the lion had finished his story, and the animals had eaten their dinner, they commenced to work again. and worked all afternoon. Late that night, the papa bear came home with a lot of strawberries that he had found, and all of the bears had a fine supper. The elephant ate hay and grass, and the other animals found something they liked to eat. After the lion had finished the story, the little cub bear commenced to tease his papa for a story about the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa. But the papa bear said he was tired of telling stories about the little bear that would not mind his papa, but would tell a story about a clubfoot grizzly bear if the little cub bear wanted to hear it. The little cub bear said that he did, and snuggled up as close as he could to his papa. For grizzly bears are as large as 4 or 5 grown-up brown bears all put together, and they have great teeth and claws. They like to eat little pigs and little calves and such things instead of berries and honey. When the little cub bear had snuggled up as close to his papa as he could, the papa bear commenced. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. Salem, Las Vegas, Nevada. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The true story of how 10 men did not kill Clubfoot. When I was a little bear cub, long before I met your mother, and long before you were born, I lived in a small cave near a store where men used to meet and talk about the bears they had killed and the mountain lions they had seen, and all sorts of stories of that kind. Well, I used to come down in the dark sometimes and put my ear up to the crack between the logs and listen to what the men said. One evening, while the men were telling stories, one of them said, "Did you ever hear of the big grizzly called Clubfoot?" And all the men said that they had heard of Clubfoot, except one of the men that had not lived there very long. He said that he had never heard of this grizzly. The men told this newcomer that Clubfoot was a very large bear, one of the largest that had ever been seen. The men said that a great many men had tried to kill this giant grizzly because he would kill their little pigs and their little calves and colts. Then, too, they wanted to get his great skin to make a carriage robe, but they had never been able to get the bear, for even if they hit him with bullets from their guns, it did not seem to hurt him very much but made him very angry. This grizzly, instead of running away from a man with a gun, would run right up to him and knock the gun out of his hand. No one could kill this bear. They said that the bear lived in the San Bernardino Mountains, and that his great tracks had often been seen, and that all of his toes were missing from one foot. That was the reason they called him Clubfoot. Probably when he was a little bear, he had been caught in a trap and lost his toes. They said that the bear made regular trips from Mount San Bernardino to the Antelope Valley 60 miles away. He had made the trips so often that he had made sort of a trail through the mountains. This trail, the men said, was only a mile or so back of the store. While the men were talking, another man came in and said, "Old Clubfoot has started from his den in the side of Mount San Bernardino and is coming this way. He ought to be along here sometime tonight." Then one of the men, that they called Alex, said, "It's a fine moonlight night tonight. Let's get our guns and go up to the old grizzly's trail and see if we can't kill him. There is a pig pen right near the trail with little pigs in it, so that grizzly will be sure to stop there long enough for us to shoot him." Then the man that came in last and told about Clubfoot's coming said, "There are 2 Irishmen that live a little farther along the trail that are going to do the same thing. They're going to watch near another pig pen that is farther on, and they think that they will kill Clubfoot." "Well," Alex said, "there will be 10 of us with guns of all sorts. And I think those Irishmen will never see old Clubfoot, for he will never get as far as they are. We will have his skin by that time." All the men said, "We'll do it. It will be lots of fun, and Clubfoot will not bother the farmer's little pigs and calves and colts any more." All the men got their guns and rifles and some lunch to eat while they were waiting for old Clubfoot to come along. I was very curious to see what the men would do and how they would kill the grizzly. And then, too, I wanted to see a great grizzly bear. So I followed the men, but I kept so far behind that they did not see me at all. As the men walked along, they talked about how they would kill old Clubfoot, as they call the great grizzly bear. The men said they thought they would climb trees and wait in the tops of them where they would be safer, and where the bear could not get at them before they had had a chance to kill him. 2 men, though, said that they were going to stay on the ground, and that the other men ought not to be afraid and climb in the tops of trees. They ought to stay down on the ground and shoot the bear there, and they laughed at the men who said they were going to stay up in the trees. Finally, they came to the path that old Clubfoot usually traveled, and there was the pig pen with the little pigs in it. All the men but 2 climbed up into the trees, and there they waited. I went around and hid behind a rock to see what would happen. Very soon there came a great crashing noise, and as I looked up along the path, I saw old Clubfoot coming very fast. He didn't stop for anything. He went right through the bushes and jumped over the tops of the small trees, and as he came out into the moonlight, he seemed to be as big as Jumbo. I waited and thought I would hear the men shooting, but suddenly I heard the men who were on the ground crying out to the men who had gone up in the trees, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! If you shoot the old Clubfoot and don't kill him, he will surely kill us." And they dropped their guns and ran as fast as they could and commenced to climb trees. They climbed up a little way, but they were so frightened and so hurried that they would slip back. Old Clubfoot came right along, but he didn't notice the men at all or pay any attention to them. He went right up to the pig pen and he hit it one blow and knocked it all to pieces. He took up 2 pigs, one in each of his great 4 paws, and off he went down the path, and not one of the men fired a single shot. Pretty soon, the men came down from the trees, and they all began to scold one another. One man said to Alex, "Why didn't you shoot?" "Well," he said, "the old Clubfoot looked as big as an elephant, and I thought if I shot him and didn't kill him, that he would come and shake the tree down and eat me up." And the other men said that that was the reason they didn't shoot. Then they said to the brave fellows who stayed on the ground, "Why didn't you shoot?" "Well," they said, "we didn't know the bear was so big." After the men got nearly home, they sat down and talked it over, and one of them said, "What will you say to the 2 Irishmen that were going to kill Clubfoot? You know, we thought we would kill him, and he would never get as far as the Irishman." And they all agreed that they would not say a thing about it to anyone, but would wait and see what the Irishmen said when they came into the store the next evening. Well, the next evening I went down and hid behind the house to hear what the men would say. And sure enough, very soon in came the 2 Irishmen. One Irishman was named Mike, and the other Pat. The men all said, "Hello, Mike," and "Hello, Pat," but no one said anything about old Clubfoot. After a while, Alex said, "Well, Mike, where is the bear skin you were going to bring us?" For Mike had said he would have a bear skin for them that night. "Didn't you see old Clubfoot?" "Yes," Mike said, "we saw Clubfoot. He came right by us, and we were sitting on the roof of the pig pen. He knocked the pig pen right out from under us and took a little pig and ran off with it." "Well," Alex said, "why didn't you shoot him?" And Mike said, Well, we couldn't find our guns." And so that was the way the 10 men didn't kill old Clubfoot. and it is said that he is still living in the San Bernardino Mountains and still goes over the same old trail every year. For some reason, no one has ever succeeded in getting him. After Papa Bear finished the story, Little Cub Bear said, "I wish I were a great big grizzly bear so that I would not be afraid of a gun." But Papa Bear said, "It is always a good thing to be afraid of a gun, no matter how big you may be." The little cub bear ran off to bed in the dark and was soon fast asleep. In his sleep, he reached out with his paw and gave a great slap. Then a moment after, he reached out again and gave another slap. Can you guess what he was dreaming about? The next morning, the little cub bear woke up very early and rubbed his eyes and wondered if any animal would come that day. He listened and listened, but he heard nothing. Suddenly there was a loud bang, bang, and he knew that some animal was coming. The little cub bear ran to the mouth of the den where he could hear a rustling sound. He looked down the path, but he could see nothing. He looked again, and this time he looked up among the branches of the trees because he thought it might be a bird coming. And what do you think he saw? Away up among the branches of the trees, he could see an animal's head. He said, "I see an animal's head moving among the trees. His head has large ears and very large eyes, and two horns different from any horns I ever saw. They are blunt on the end and stick straight up and seem to have hair on the end of the horns. I can't see the animal, but I see a long, long neck covered with big yellow spots. As the animal comes nearer, I can see more of his neck, and now I can see his legs and his body. His body looks something like a horse, only the hind legs are much shorter than the front legs. If you tried to ride on his back, you would slip off behind because it is slanting like a hill and all covered with those yellow spots." Just then, the owl saw the animal and he said, "Hoo, hoo." The animal did not say a word, but came right along. Just as he got to the mouth of the den, Circus Bear said, "I know who that is. That is Mr. Giraffe. Ask him to come in." So the little cub bear said, very politely, "Come in, Mr. Giraffe." But of course, the giraffe could not come in. Finally, he knelt down and stuck his long neck into the cave, and the cub bear said to him, "We're going to try to build a house big enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. Can you help us?" And the giraffe said, "I would be very glad to help you if I could, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And little cub bear said, "What can you do?" The giraffe answered, "I don't know. I never built a house in my life. I eat the leaves off the trees and live out of doors just like the horses and zebras and cows. I never had a home. But I have the longest neck of any animal in the whole world. And if there is anything up in the air you want me to look for, or if there is anything a long way off that you would like to have me see, I think I can look for it for you." And the little cub bear suddenly thought of the hole way back in the back part of the cave where the wind came from, and he said, "I wish you would come in and see if you can put your head through a hole in the back part of the cave. Maybe you will find something." And the giraffe said, "I will be very glad to try." And so he wriggled and twisted and got into the den and got away back in the back part, and he found a hole, and it was just large enough for his head and his long neck. He stuck his head farther and farther into the hole and stayed there so long that the little cub bear was afraid something was wrong. So he and the monkey took hold of the giraffe's tail and pulled just as hard as they could. The giraffe finally pulled his head out of the hole, and the cub bear said, "What did you see?" And the giraffe said, I found it very dark, and I had to keep my head in a long time so that my eyes would get used to the darkness. But I could see that there was a large room, a large cave back of this cave, and I couldn't see the end of it at all. I think if we could only get into this room, we would have a place large enough for all the animals in the circus, if they wanted to come here to live. And the little cub bear said, "My, wouldn't that be nice? I wonder if all the animals would help if we couldn't break down the rock and get into this room." That night, after all the animals had done all they could to get things to eat and to make the cave large enough, the lion and some of the other animals came into the cave. The giraffe was still out, trying to get enough leaves to eat, and the elephant was eating the last of the baled hay that had been brought from the train wreck. "Papa, please tell me another story about the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa." The papa bear sighed a great sigh because he was very tired, but he wanted to please the little fellow, so he told the story of End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. Salem, Las Vegas, Nevada. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Clubfoot Bear That Would Not Mind His Papa. A Great Smash-Up. After the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa had had his nose split, had lost an ear, had nearly drowned 3 times, and all of the toes had been cut off 1 foot, the papa bear thought he had better move away to some place where there were not so many things to hurt little bears. So he moved a long, long way to a place where there was a great coal mine. The men would go down in the ground and dig coal from way under the ground. The coal was to be burned in stoves to keep little boys and girls warm in the wintertime, for they do not sleep all winter as little bears do. The coal was used also to cook what the little boys and girls and their papas and their mamas ate: bread and meat and pies and cakes and everything nice. The coal was used to make the railway monsters go back and forth on the tracks, hauling men and circus trains and freight trains. A railway monster could not go toot-toot or choo-choo-choo, move or do anything without coal or coal oil. The little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa thought that the coal mine was very fine. He liked to watch the men as they went down into the ground in cages or elevators, and to watch them come up at night with their little coffee pot-like lamps hanging in front of their caps to show them where to go in the dark. You see that it was always dark way down in the mine. He liked to watch the engine as it went puff, puff, puff. But this engine did not move back and forth like a locomotive. It was called a stationary engine because it stood in one place. And how do you suppose it moved the men? One part of the engine was called a drum because it was round like a drum, and on this was a great steel rope like a thread on a great spool. As the drum or spool turned around and round, the rope would be wound up or unwound, and the rope went up over a great wheel and then hung down in the hole, and the cage with the men in it was on the end of the rope, and as the rope unwound, the cage went down into the hole in the ground, and as it wound up, the cage came up to the top of the ground. But the men had to be very careful to stop in time, or the men and the cage would all be wound around the drum and smashed and killed. Now the papa bear was very careful to tell the little bear never, never to touch the engine or anything about it. But one day, the little club-footed bear that would not mind his papa went into the engine room when everyone else had gone away to dinner. The engineer had just stepped out, It was a cold day, and the little bear enjoyed the warm room. The machinery was all so bright, some looked like gold, and some looked like silver, and some parts were a beautiful bright red, and others were a pretty green. After the little bear that would not mind his papa had been there for a while, he saw a sort of handle, and before he stopped to think, he reached up and gave it a strong pull to see if it would move. And what do you think happened? The engine went puff, puff, puff. The wheels went around and around, and the drums commenced to wind the rope up very, very fast. My! How frightened the little clubfoot bear was. He ran away as fast as he could run, but he was scarcely out of the door before the cage came to the top of the ground. But there was no one to stop the engine, and so the cage went on up to the wheel. And there was a great crash, and down came the wheel and cage, and on to the great drum. And then there was the greatest tearing and smashing and breaking you ever heard. Bang, bang, smash, smash, crack, crack, crash, crash. And then the noise stopped, for the beautiful engine was broken all to pieces. And the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa ran and ran. And he didn't go home that night, nor the next night, for he was ashamed to meet his papa. All the time he was saying, "Oh, why didn't I mind my papa? The beautiful engine is all smashed, and the poor little donkeys that haul away the coal cars away down in the mine will starve to death because no one can take them anything to eat." But finally, the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa went home. He found his papa feeling very sad because he thought his little cub was killed. The papa kissed him and gave him a great bear hug, but he felt very sorry, and so did the little cub. When the papa bear had finished telling his story to the little cub, the little bear said very sweetly, "Good night, papa dear. I am always going to do just what you tell me to do." And Papa Bear said, "I hope so, little cub." That night, the little cub bear got up in his sleep and ran as fast as he could, but he soon ran against his papa, who was sleeping there in the cave. The papa bear saw that he had been running in his sleep, so he took him and put him back in his bed. He must have been dreaming. Can you guess what he was dreaming about? The next morning, after the animals had their breakfast, the little cub bear told them that the giraffe had said there was a fine cave back of the one where the bears lived. So the animals all agreed that they would do the best they could and all work together to see if they could not succeed in making a hole large enough for all the animals to get through into the next cave. For you remember that the hole was only large enough for the long-necked giraffe to get his head through. They went to work to make the hole larger. The mule kicked down rocks. The goat butted down more rocks. The monkey, the bears, the mama bear, the papa bear, Susie bear, the circus bear, and the little cub bear all carried the rocks out of the cave. The elephant helped as well as he could with his trunk, but the mouth of the cave was so small that he could not get in to work. They all worked until they were tired, but they could not get through into the cave, although the hole was made much larger. That night, before they went to sleep, the little cub bear teased his papa for a story about the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa. But the papa bear was so tired that he asked if some of the animals would not be willing to tell little cub bear a story. The parrot said that she had heard a story told by the lion about his most narrow escape, and that she would be willing to tell the story of her most narrow escape if the little cub bear would promise not to ask his papa for another story that night. Of course, the little cub bear promised, and so the parrot told the story of her most narrow escape from death. End of chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betsy Walker, Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Parrot's Most Narrow Escape. "Well," said the parrot, "I lived in South America where there were many beautiful trees and many strange animals and some of the largest snakes in the whole world. The very largest snake that lives there is called the boa constrictor. He is so large that he can swallow a deer whole. And of course a poor little parrot or a chicken or a rabbit would not make a meal for him. It would hardly make a dessert. One day I was seated on the end of a long limb, nearly asleep, when suddenly I looked up and saw a man pointing a gun at me and all ready to shoot me. I was so frightened that I could not move, and I expected him to shoot any minute. But I thought that before I was killed, I would take one last look at the blue sky that I was never to see again. And what do you think I saw? A great snake, a boa constrictor, coiled around the limb above me and looking at me as though he wanted to eat me. I was more frightened than ever. It seemed that his look made me weak, sick, and dizzy. Before I could move, the snake darted at me like a flash, seized me, and began to swallow me. In a moment, I was just like poor Jonah, only I was inside a snake instead of a whale. Everything was dark, and I could not think, except that I knew I would die in a minute. Suddenly, I heard a great bang, bang, and the old snake began to squirm and twist. Then, in a moment, I felt something cut through the snake, and I was out in the bright sunshine, and the sun almost blinded my eyes. You see, the man had shot the snake instead of shooting me as he had intended. He took me out and put me in a bag that he had with him. Then he sent me to the circus, and I was there until the wreck of the train. There I learned to talk like the men. I could say, "Polly wants a cracker," "Come right in, ladies and gentlemen," and many other things. I learned to sneeze like a man, "Kerchoo-oo-oo," "Kerchoo-oo-oo," and to snore like a man, "Ah-hoo, ah-hoo, ah-hoo," and to cough, and to whistle so that I could call a dog, and to cluck so that I could make the horses go, and I learned to ride on a dog's back without sticking my claws in so that it hurt him. But that is all my story. "My," said the little cub bear, "what a narrow escape! We should never lose hope. I'm glad that you escaped." After the parrot had finished the story, the little cub bear went to sleep. When he was sound asleep, he suddenly began to breathe hard, as though he could not get enough air, and he twisted around and seemed to be smothering. Soon, though, he breathed a great deep breath, and then he was still and quiet. I think that he must have been dreaming. Can you guess what he was dreaming about? The little cub bear slept very late next morning, and when he got up, all of the animals were up and were talking about the cave and wondering whether any more of the animals would come that day. While the animals were talking, they heard two great noises, bang, bang, and they knew that the beaver was telling them that some animal was coming. The cub bear rushed to the mouth of the cave to see who it was, and he said, "I see 2 rats coming up the path. They are perfectly white. With the 2 rats is a rat that is bigger than both of them. It has beautiful fur." Just then, the cub bear looked up at the owl to see why the owl did not say, "Hoo, hoo." And just as he looked, he saw the old owl start from his perch with a great fluttering of wings and pounce like a flash down on the rats. And he caught one of the white rats in his claws and flew back to his perch. And there he began to eat this poor little white rat. But the other white rat and the muskrat came into the cave. The little cub bear said very politely, "Come in, Mr. Rat." But the little white rat was trembling so that he couldn't say a thing. And the cub bear said, I am very glad I am not a little rat to be eaten up by a wicked old owl." But the circus bear said, "You know that owls eat rats and mice and little birds and things of that kind, but this owl is a very good, kind owl, and I am surprised that he would harm one of the white rats from the circus. But I guess he is very hungry, because he has been sitting up there a long while with nothing to eat." Then the cub bear said, "We are going to try to build a house big enough for all the animals, so if they come to see us, we will have a place for them to stay. We think there is a large cave, large enough for us all, back of this cave, but we don't know. Can you help us?" Then the muskrat said, "I should be very glad to help you if I can, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" And the muskrat said, "I can climb through this round hole here and see what there is in there." So he scampered through the hole where the giraffe had looked and was gone a long, long while, and they all waited and wondered why he didn't come back. Finally, the muskrat did come back, but he was all wet, and all the animals wondered why. The little cub bear said, "What did you find?" The muskrat said, "I found the most beautiful cave in the whole world. It has a level, smooth floor and is nice and clean, and there are beautiful columns that come down from the roof to the floor of the cave, just like pillars in a great palace. And away back in the back part of the cave, there is a beautiful stream of clear, cold water. I had a fine swim in it. This cave is large enough for all the animals in the circus. There is one place back in the cave that is big enough for all the circus tents of the circus we used to be in." And the circus bear said, "My, that is grand," because he knew how large the tents were. And the little cub bear said, "My, that is grand," because his brother had said the same thing, and he knew it must be so. Then the animals began to plan how they would get into this cave. Finally, they all agreed that if they could make the opening of the den large enough for the elephant to get in, and if the rhinoceros should come with his great horn, and some more of the animals would come, that they surely could get into this cave. So that night the elephant worked as hard as he could with his tusks and his trunk, and all the bears worked carrying out rock and stones and digging out roots with their claws. And the monkey scampered around and carried out small rocks and pulled out small roots and helped some, but he kept pulling the elephant's tail every once in a while and was more bother than he was help, just like some boys that you know. But finally they got the mouth of the den large enough so the elephant could come in. He came in and sat down, and then there was hardly room enough for any other animal. The poor little cub bear and the circus bear were squeezed up tight against the wall, and Papa and Mama bear had to get way back in the back part of the cave, and the monkey had to hang to a root way up on the top of the cave. But by turning around slowly, the elephant found that he could use his tusks and trunk to move some of the rocks. They all worked hard until they were tired, and were nearly through into the cave, and had made the room so much larger that they all had room to sit down and talk. The next morning early, the little cub bear heard the bang-bang of the beaver's tail, and rushed to the mouth of the cave, and there he saw a very large animal, with 2 horns on the end of his nose, and a funny-looking skin, hard and horny. He knew at once that the animal was the rhinoceros the lion had told about the night before. The owl said, "Hoo, hoo," and the animal answered with a terrible snort and roar. Then the rhinoceros came to the mouth of the cave, and the little bear said, "I am very glad that you came, because we are trying to build a house that will be large enough to hold all of the animals that used to live in the circus. And the giraffe tells us that there is a large cave back of this cave, and if we can only break through, we will have a house that will be big enough for us all." Then the rhinoceros said, "What can I do? For I would like to help. Your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus, and I would be very glad to do anything that I can." The little cub bear said, I think that with that great horn of yours, you could help to tear out some of the dirt and rocks, and the monkeys and the bears could then carry them out. Perhaps the elephant would be hitched to the chariot, and we could carry out some of the dirt and rocks in it." The rhinoceros said that he would be very glad to do this. That night, after the animals were through with their work, the little cub bear, who was the greatest fellow for stories that you ever saw, began to tease his papa for another story about the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa. Finally, the papa bear said that he would tell a story if the little cub bear would promise to go right to bed as soon as he was through with the story. Of course, the little cub bear said that he would, so Papa Bear told him the story of... End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betsy Walker, Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Little Clubfoot Bear That Would Not Mind His Papa, and the Dynamite. "You know that little cub bears like to eat," said the Papa Bear to his little cub bear. "But the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa once found a tallow candle, and he ate it all up, and it tasted as good to him as a stick of candy does to a little boy. And so always after that he was looking for tallow candles. Not far from where the little bear lived there was a mine, where miners were digging in the rock to see if they couldn't get out some gold. And the miners had candles to use, so that when they were in the mine where it was dark, they could light a candle and see to work. One time, the little clubfoot bear found a whole box of candles, and he took 8 or 10 candles out and carried them home and ate them. And when his papa found it out, he told him not to go there any more because he might get hurt. The little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa stayed away from the mine for a long time. But one day, after he had eaten all the candles up, he thought he would like to go back again and see if he could not find some more. So he went, and he found another box of candles as he thought. They looked almost like the other candles, but they were not so white. They were yellow and covered with paper. If the little clubfoot bear could have read as little boys can, he would have seen these letters on the box: DYNAMITE. Just as he got his arms full of these candles, as he thought, he heard the men coming, and he ran over to a tree and climbed the tree as fast as he could with his arms full of these yellow candles. He got nearly to the top of the tree on a big limb, and there he sat and waited. The men came out, but they went back into the mine. The little clubfoot bear took a big bite, but the very first chew he took, he found it did not taste right at all. So he spit it out, and then he thought he would throw the rest down because he did not like them and wanted to get home as fast as he could. So he threw the whole armful of yellow sticks right down onto a rock, and when it struck the rock, what do you suppose happened? Bang! A bigger noise than all the firecrackers in the world put together would make, and the rocks began to fly through the air, and the tree jumped right out of the ground and began to fall down, down, down the side of the mountain. The bear hugged the tree as tightly as he could, but it kept falling. And finally it fell, kersplash, right into the river. The little bear was terribly frightened and was nearly drowned, but he scrambled out onto the tree as fast as he could, and you never saw a little bear run so fast in your life. He could not have run faster if all the dogs you ever saw had been running after him. And when he got home to his den, he ran to the very darkest part, and there he covered his eyes and his ears with his paws. But all the time he could hear a great ringing in his ears, and the terrible bang, bang, bang. That night, after the little clubfoot bear finally went to sleep, he suddenly made a great jump and jumped clear over his papa bear and pretty nearly out of the den. After that, you never could get that little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa to eat candles. After the papa bear had finished the story of the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa, he said, "Little cub bear, what do you think of that story?" And the little cub bear scratched his head and said, "I am glad the little bear wasn't killed." And the little cub bear ran off and went to sleep. During the night he dreamed, and several times he gave a jump, just as though he were going to jump out of the bed. Can you guess what he was dreaming about? The next morning, the little cub bear said to his papa that he had noticed a box marked just like the box from which the little clubfoot bear that would not mind his papa had eaten the things that had looked like candles. The box had been left by some miners away back in the woods and had in big letters on it the word Dynamite. When the papa bear heard this, he began to think and to scratch his head. He was thinking that if the stuff in the box had knocked the big tree down, perhaps it would help them to knock the rocks down, so that they could get into the beautiful cave. The papa bear was wondering about it when he saw the old owl looking so solemn and wise. Then he said to himself, "I will ask the wise old owl. He can't help much digging into the cave, but as he is the wisest bird in the world, maybe he can tell me what to do with this stuff that knocks great trees down." So the papa bear said to little Susie Bear, "Run and tell the old owl that I want to ask him a question." So Susie Bear ran out as fast as she could and said to the owl, "Papa wants you to come into the cave so that he can ask a question of you." And the old owl looked wise and said, "Who, who?" And Susie Bear said, "You, you." The old owl solemnly winked his great eyes and slowly flapped his great wings and flew to the cave. "Well, well, well," said the owl, "I am very glad to come into the cave, for you know that the light hurts my eyes, and I usually go out only at night. What can I do for you?" The papa bear then told the owl what he had been thinking about. The owl said very wisely, "I am sure that the stuff will knock down the rocks, for I have seen miners use it, and it makes the rocks fly so they have to run to get way off to keep from getting hurt. I think if you could get some of the stuff, you would find that you would soon get into the beautiful cave that we all want to see." The papa bear asked the elephant if he was willing to go with the little cub bear to find the box. The elephant Jumbo said that he would be glad to go because the animals had all been so good to him in the circus. Jumbo got down on his knees, and the little cub bear climbed up on his back, and away they went to find the box that had in it such wonderful stuff. They went a long, long way, and finally the little cub bear saw the box and pointed it out to Jumbo, who carefully picked it up with his trunk and with his tusks, just as he had the bales of hay, and carried it back toward the den. When they were coming back, what do you suppose they saw? The funniest little animal that the little cub bear had ever seen. It was nearly as big as a pig, but it looked like a great mouse. Its front legs were very short, like small arms, while its hind legs were very long. Its tail was as large around as a man's arm, and then it had a pocket, only the pocket was in front as the animal stood up, instead of on the sides as boys' pockets are. And what in the world do you suppose was in this pocket? Another little baby animal just like the big one. All you could see of the little fellow was his head peering out of the pocket. As they stopped to watch the animals, the little fellow hopped out of the pocket and took 2 little hops, and then when he saw the elephant, scampered back as fast as he could. The elephant told the little cub bear that this animal was the greatest jumper in the whole world. And while the elephant was telling this to the little cub bear, the animal saw the elephant and was so glad to see his old friend Jumbo that with 2 great jumps, it reached Jumbo, and with the third, jumped clear over the elephant, bear, and all. Jumbo said, "How do you do, Madam Kangaroo and the little baby kangaroo?" And the kangaroo said, "Very well, thank you." Jumbo then told the kangaroo where they were going and what they were going to do. Madam Kangaroo said, "It is very fortunate that you found me, for when you drop a rock on the stuff to make it go off, you will want someone that can jump out of the way quicker than scat, and no one can jump as well or as fast as I can." They hurried back to the cave, and here they found all the animals waiting for them. While they were away, the alligator had come, but he had gone down to the beaver's dam to stay because he liked the water so well, and he had not much to play and to live in while he was in the circus. The papa bear told the elephant to hurry up and put the stuff in the cave where they were trying to knock the rocks down. The circus bear and the monkey rolled the box over and over to the place, and then the elephant reached in with his trunk and put the box just where it should be. Then they found that there was no way to drop a stone on the box so that it would go off and make the rocks come down. The badger said that he would dig a hole straight up and down like a well right over the box, so that they could drop a stone straight down on the box and make it go off. So he scratched away just as he had scratched when he made the chimney, and before you knew it, the hole was dug and all was ready. The kangaroo took a great stone in her forepaws and stood over the hole ready to drop it on the box. The owl told them all that they must get as far away as they could, for the rocks would be sure to fly and might hurt them. Then he told the beaver that as soon as all were ready, he must strike the water with his tail, and the kangaroo would then drop the rock on the box. So the little cub bear hid behind a tree, and everyone got ready. Then there was a bang bang. The kangaroo dropped the rock on the box and gave 3 great jumps out of the way, and there was the greatest bang you ever heard. It made more noise than all of the firecrackers you ever saw would make if they should all go off together. My, how the little cub bear did jump! And when he looked around, there was the mule Jenny, kicking and kicking and kicking. She had been hit by a rock. It did not hurt much, but of course she had to kick anyway. As soon as it was safe, all the animals that were there ran down to the cave. The elephant went in, and instead of his tail sticking out of the cave as it had before the stuff went off, he disappeared entirely. The little cub bear then ran to the cave, for he thought that the elephant had fallen into a great hole. He could not see the elephant at all, so he called, "Jumbo, Jumbo, where are you?" "Here I am," said Jumbo, and his voice sounded far away, for the explosion had opened the way into the great cave, and the elephant was already far back in it. All of the animals came running up, and how glad they were to think they had such a beautiful home. The floor was almost as level as the floor is in your house. It was a long way up to the ceiling or roof. There were great pillars coming down from the roof to the floor, and everything was so clean and nice that almost any little boy or little girl would like to have lived there. Then there was ever so much room in the beautiful new cave. There was room for the great tent that they all used to live in at the circus to be put up without touching the roof. There was that little stream of water that the muskrat told them of, where all could drink. The animals went out to get their things, and when they had them put all in the cave, it was dark and time for little bears to go to sleep. The little cub bear soon went to sleep, and what do you think he dreamed about? I do not know. Perhaps it was about heaven, whose streets are paved with gold and whose gates are of pearl. Perhaps. Who can tell? End of chapter 13.
Chapter 14 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Coming of the Animal with the Long Nose. The next morning the animals got up early, and the elephant said he thought that they ought to go down where the circus train had been wrecked, and see if there was anything more that they could bring up and put in the cave, as they had plenty of room now. But while they were talking about the way they would do the work, they heard the beaver's tail go bang, bang! And they all looked up, and what do you think they saw? The queerest kind of an animal. He looked like a small bear, but he had very long hair on his back and hind legs, and his front legs were much shorter than his hind legs. But that was not the queerest thing. The little cub bear said, "Oh, see his nose? It looks as if he had caught the end of his nose in a trap and had pulled and pulled until he had stretched his nose like a piece of taffy and had made it as long as my leg. Did you ever see such a long nose in the whole world?" The elephant said that he had a very long nose. But the little cub bear said that he wasn't talking about trunks that had fingers and thumbs on the end of them, but that he was talking about real noses. Then the papa bear and mama bear said they never in the whole world thought that any animal would have such a nose. The papa bear asked the circus bear what the animal was. The circus bear said, "That is a bear. He is called an ant bear." "Oh," said the cub bear, "I have 2 aunt bears and they don't look a bit like that." "Please don't interrupt me when I'm talking," said the circus bear. "This is an A-N-T bear, not an A-U-N-T bear. He is called an ant bear because he eats ants." "Oh, I want to see him eat some of these ants that got into the honey that Papa brought home the other day." As soon as the ant bear came near, the little cub bear ran to him and asked him to show how he ate the ants. The ant bear said that he would be very glad to do so, because he had not had a good meal of ants for the longest while. In the circus, he said they fed him on meat. The ant bear said that he liked the taste of ants ever so much better. I would not. Would you? Well, the little cub bear showed the ant bear where the ants lived in a hole in the ground. Then he saw why the ant bear had such strong claws, for he dug into the ground very quickly. Then, what do you suppose that ant bear did? He ran the point of his long nose into the hole where the ants lived, and then stuck out the longest tongue you ever saw, way down in the hole, until it was covered with ants that had stuck to it. Then the little cub bear saw why the ant bear had such a long nose, and a long tongue that looked like a pink rope. Do you see why? As soon as the ant bear had eaten all of the ants, the little cub bear said, "The ants are such little things. I should think you would not get enough to eat." But the ant bear said, "Down in South America, where I came from, the ants are larger. They are as big as the big red and black ants, and they live in houses that are as large as a haycock. I dig into these with my strong claws and eat up bushels and bushels of ants at a time." While they were talking, they heard the beaver go bang, bang several times, and each time the solemn old owl would say, "Hoo, hoo, hoo." The little cub bear counted 4 times and thought that there must be 4 animals coming. And sure enough, when they came to the den, there were 4 new animals. There was the raccoon with his striped tail. He was always washing his face. There was a great striped tiger, almost as large as a lion, and quite as fierce-looking. There was a leopard that looked something like the tiger, but was not quite so large, and instead of stripes, he was covered with black spots. Then, over in a corner, was a little thing that looked like a soft and beautiful round ball. It looked so nice that the little cub bear ran right over to play with it, and before the circus bear could stop him, the little cub bear had given the little ball quite a hard slap. Ouch! Ouch! How the little bear did scream and cry, and his poor little foot was full of stickers. The circus bear scolded the cub bear. Didn't you know that that was a porcupine, and that he was covered with quills on purpose to stick into people that touch him? You ought to have known better. But the little cub bear did not see how he could have known better, for no one had ever told him before, and he had never seen a porcupine before, and it looked like a nice ball for little cub bear to play with. So the little cub bear thought to himself, I hope my papa will tell me about all of the things that hurt little bears, so that I will not get hurt so badly again. I am afraid that papas sometimes forget to tell their little cubs about the things that hurt. How am I going to get these awful quills out anyway? I've tried as hard as I can, and I cannot get hold of the little slippery things with my clumsy claws. The papa bear came and tried, and he could not get the quills out. Then the mama bear tried, and she worked ever so much longer than the papa bear, but she could not get the quills out of the little cub bear's foot. The mama bear was very angry with the miserable little porcupine, and wanted to give him a hard slap. But she knew that she would get her foot full of the quills, and that would be worse than ever. The porcupine did not care at all, for he said to himself, If they don't want to get hurt, let them leave me alone. But I do not think that was right, do you? Of course they did not want to get hurt. Not long after, the monkey came and said, What is the matter? The little cub bear then told the monkey how he had just touched that mean old porcupine and had got his foot full of quills that no one in the whole world could ever get out. But the monkey said, I can get them out all right, for you know that I have 2 hands with fingers on them, just like a little boy. So the monkey pulled out all of the quills, and after that the little cub bear could walk all right. But he said to himself, After this, I will let other people alone until I get acquainted with them. I think that is a good rule, don't you? That evening, after dark, the little cub bear heard the beaver go, Bang, bang, and he rushed to the mouth of the cave to see who was coming. He saw a very strange-looking animal coming up the path. He said, I see an animal that is about the size of a rhinoceros, only he has no horns on the end of his nose, and he has the biggest nose I ever saw. It is not a long nose, but it is a short, stubby nose, about the size of the seat of a chair. The 2 big nostrils in the nose are almost as big around as a baseball. I can't see why the nose is so big. Oh, yes, I can too, for he has just yawned, and he has the longest and largest teeth of any animal in the whole world, I guess. They are as big around as a leg of a chair. His mouth is so large that a little bear could sit inside of it. His legs are almost as big around as an elephant's legs, only they are very short. Just then the owl said, Hoo! Hoo! The animal did not say a thing, but he gave a great snort. The circus bear said, I know who that is. That is Mr. Hippopotamus. In the circus, they called him Sam. Just then, the hippopotamus came up to the door of the cave, and the little cub bear said very politely, Come in, Mr. Hippopotamus? You see, it was such a long word, he could not pronounce it right. So Mr. Hippopotamus came into the cave, and as he did so, he gave a great yawn, which frightened the little cub bear so that he ran way back to the back part of the cave. The hippopotamus said, "Don't be afraid, little cub bear, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus, and I wouldn't hurt you for anything." So the little cub bear came back, and he looked the hippopotamus over and saw that he did not have any hair on his body at all, and that he was about the colour of an old slate, and that he had a very fierce-looking mouth. After a little while, the little cub bear plucked up courage, and he said, "Mr. Hippopotamus, we are going to fix up the cave for all the animals, and we want to know if you can help us." The hippopotamus said, "I would be very glad to help you if I can, because your brother was very good to me when we were in the circus." And the little cub bear said, "What can you do?" "Well," he said, "I don't know. I can't dig in the dirt, because when I'm at home I live in the water. Sometimes I stay all day in the water, with nothing but the end of my nose above the surface, and then I can stay under the water a long while without coming to the surface at all." The cub bear said, "That is just like the whale." And the hippopotamus said, "Yes, just like the whale, only when I come to the surface, I don't make such a big blowing sound as the whale does." Well, the little cub bear thought a long while, and he couldn't think of anything the hippopotamus could do. So he said to his papa, "Papa, can you tell me what the hippopotamus can do to help us in building our house?" And the papa bear said, "I don't know. I think if he would go down and live in the lake above the dam that the beaver built, that would be the best place for him, and he could help the beaver to make the dam higher, and then, when the beaver went to sleep, the hippopotamus could make some kind of a noise to warn us when people were coming." So the hippopotamus agreed that he would do this, and he went down to the lake. Just before he left, he said, "I am very hungry, and I would like something to eat." And the little cub bear said, "We have plenty of meat here, if you would like some meat." The hippopotamus said, "I don't eat meat. I eat grass like a horse, only the grass I eat I get way down under the water." The little cub bear said, "Then you will find plenty to eat down in the lake." And the hippopotamus went away to the lake, where he got acquainted with the beaver and planned to live there as long as the animals were living in the forest. End of chapter 14. Recording by Katie Francesca. Chapter 15 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The monkey's story of his most narrow escape. The next evening, the cub bear and all the animals were sitting in the cave, just before the little cub bear was to go to bed, and the little cub bear teased his papa for a story, but his papa said he was too tired to tell a story, for he had hunted all day trying to find a honey tree, and had not found one. The little cub bear kept on teasing for a story, but his papa said he was so tired he could not think of a story to tell. Then the monkey said, "I will tell you a story, little cub bear, if you wish me to." And the cub bear said, "Yes, tell me a story of your most narrow escape from death." "Well," said the monkey, "I once belonged to a man who owned a drugstore in a large city. He had another monkey named Jim, and a parrot. The parrot was a large green bird, and he had learned to talk like a man. He could say, "Goodbye, good day, good night, Polly wants a cracker," and "See what you did." One day, Jim and the parrot and I were all down in the cellar, and the druggist forgot and shut the door, so that we had to stay down there. But we had a fine time, running about and jumping over everything that came in the way. We jumped up to the ceiling and jumped from one beam to another and then down to the floor. I pulled Jim's tail and ran away. He would run after me and pull mine and jump away quickly. And once or twice the parrot got hold of us, but he really hurt us with his great bill and his claws, so that we kept out of his way most of the time. In fact, he hurt me so badly once that I pulled a couple of his tail feathers out just to show him how I felt. Jim and I were scampering across the floor when we struck a great carboy, a great bottle larger than a pail, and knocked it over on the cement floor where it broke. The stuff that was in it ran out on the floor, and the parrot said, "See what you did, see what you did." This bottle had on it, in big letters, "Sulfuric acid." We were sorry that we had tipped over the bottle, but we didn't feel very bad until Jim found that he had some of the stuff on the end of his tail, and it was burning him terribly. It burned so much that he tried to run away from the end of his tail, but he was so careless in jumping about that he struck another big carboy sitting on the floor, and he knocked that over too and spilled the stuff that was in it. And the parrot said, "See what you did, see what you did." This bottle had on it in big letters, "Nitric acid." This stuff ran out all over the floor and ran into a hole in the centre of the floor that was shaped something like a bowl. I got some of it on my foot and it didn't feel very good. So I commenced to run around too and jump up to the ceiling, and I thought I would keep off the floor. There we found a great big can filled with glycerine. Do you know what glycerine is? It tastes sweet like honey. I dipped my foot in the glycerine to see if it would stop the smarting, and Jim put the end of his tail in it too. But we were so excited that the first thing we knew, we tipped over the entire can of glycerine on the floor, and that went into the same hole where the other stuff was. And the parrot said, "See what you did, see what you did." After we tipped over the glycerine, we noticed a horrible smell, so Jim and I and the parrot all went back in the corner as far away as we could get and stayed there about 2 hours. But after a while, Jim's tail hurt him so badly and the smell was so awful that he commenced to run around in the most reckless way. He jumped all over the cellar, and finally, just as he was over this hole where all the stuff had been spilled, he knocked down a great jug, and that dropped right into the stuff, and there was the most awful explosion that you can imagine. The drugstore and everything in it was blown away up into the air, and poor Jim flew up so high that we never saw him again. The parrot was terribly frightened, but when he looked up and saw Jim go up out of sight in the air, he said, "Goodbye, goodbye." And then he looked over at me and saw that nearly all my hair was burned off, and he looked at himself and saw that his feathers were nearly all gone. He said, "See what you did, see what you did, see what you did." When the monkey had finished his story, the little cub bear said, "Well, what was it that made such a terrible explosion?" The monkey said, "I don't know, but afterward I saw some men walking around the ruins of the drugstore, and they saw a broken carboy and an empty can of glycerine, and they said the stuff must have become mixed and made nitroglycerine." Then the little cub bear said, "That stuff must be a good deal like the stuff we found in the box that opened the way into the beautiful cave for us." And the monkey said, "Yes, I heard one man say that nitroglycerine and dynamite were the same. That dynamite was just nitroglycerine mixed with a kind of clay." The next night, just before bedtime, Little Cub Bear said he wanted to hear the story the little bird had promised to tell them. All of the animals said they wanted to hear it too, so the little bird began. End of chapter 15. Recording by Katie Francesca. Chapter 16 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The story of the little bird's escape from the alligator. "You see, I am a very small bird, and I live in a very peculiar way. Almost all day I spend my time in the open mouth of the great alligators as they lie on the shore of the river, basking in the sun. You see, they keep their mouths open for me, so that I can pick up all the little flies and bugs that torment them so very much. These I eat, and so both the alligator and I are pleased. The alligator is very careful not to hurt me, for you see, if he should close that great mouth, it would kill me. Well, one day the alligator went to sleep as I was hopping about on his great tongue, and he dreamed that he was in the water swimming after a big fish. In his dream, he thought he was near the fish and just going to catch it, and snap! Down came his great upper jaw right on top of the poor little bird in his mouth. I expect you wonder why I was not killed. Well, the alligator had a hole in the roof of his mouth, just large enough for me to get through, and it happened that I was right under it when his mouth closed, so I got out through the hole. How did he happen to have such a hole in his mouth? Do all alligators have such holes in the roofs of their mouths? Said the little cub bear. No, replied the bird, but a man once tried to catch this alligator. He took a stick that was sharp at both ends and nearly as big around and as long as his forearm, and when the great alligator swam after him to catch and eat him up, the man turned around and thrust his arm with the pointed stick into the alligator's mouth. As the alligator's jaws came together with a snap, the stick went clear through his upper jaw, and although the alligator got away and got the stick out, the hole was always there, and that hole saved my life. Well, said the cub bear, I think I'd rather live in a safer place than an alligator's mouth. That night, the little cub bear slept very soundly and was out early next morning, wondering whether any more animals would come. Soon he heard a noise, as if some kind of an animal was coming up the path, but he could not see what it was. Suddenly he said, I see the strangest thing. It looks like a bird's head on a long pole. The eyes are as big as large marbles. The long pole-like neck seems to have hair on it. The bill is much bigger than a goose's bill. Just then, its body came into sight. It has a beautiful tail of black and white feathers and small wings with beautiful feathers. Its neck is as long as a yardstick, and its legs are covered with great scales and are as long as its neck. Just then, this strange bird or animal saw an ear of corn lying in the path, and lowered its queer head to the ground, and began to swallow it. The ear of corn was larger around than the animal's neck, but it swallowed the ear whole without chewing it. The little cub bear was too much surprised to say anything, so he watched and could see the ear of corn going down the throat of this queer animal. The skin of the neck stretched so that the ear of corn could go down. It started down in the front of the neck and then twisted around to the back of the neck and disappeared into the top of its body. The owl called out, "Hoo! Hoo!" But this strange animal did not reply. The little cub bear told the circus bear about the corn, and he said, "Oh, I know who that is. That is the ostrich." So the little cub bear said to him very politely, "Come in, Mr. Ostrich. We have a beautiful cave and we would like to have you live with us." But the ostrich said that he would stay a while, but that he liked to lie out of doors, and that if anyone came to capture him, he would hide his head behind a bush or in the sand, and he would be all right. "But," said the little cub bear, "they could see your great body, and so could capture you." But the ostrich said, "Never mind, that's my way." So the ostrich stayed many days. There was not corn enough for him to eat, but the bears found that he could eat apples or oranges or hay or grass. In fact, one day the little cub bear found the ostrich at the scene of the train wreck, picking up all sorts of things to eat, and, strange to say, eating broken window glass and pieces of iron and stone. What a strange dinner that was! When the little cub bear returned to the cave that night, he noticed the striped tail of the raccoon, and at once asked the raccoon to tell how he was caught and put into the circus. So the raccoon stopped washing his face long enough to tell the true story of. End of chapter 16. Recording by Katie Francesca.
Chapter 17 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 17. How the Raccoon Was Caught. "Well," said the raccoon, "I don't remember when I lived in the forest, or any time before I was caught. When I opened my eyes, I found that I was living in a house where there were a man and woman, several little girls, and a boy named Ray. And the only thing I know about the way I was caught is what I heard the boy say. The boy said that one time he was hunting through the woods, and he saw a nest way up on the top of a tree. He climbed up the tree, and there he found two little coons, myself and my little brother. We had just been born, and neither of us had opened our eyes yet. He carried us home to his house, and we were crying for something to eat. We cried and cried and cried, and the little boy didn't know what to do with us or how to feed us. But finally, he left us with an old cat that had just had some kittens. Very soon we found that the old cat was willing to give us something to eat, and she nursed us, just as she had did her own little baby kittens. The first thing I saw, when I opened my eyes, was this dear old cat who had been a mother to me and to my little brother. But we grew so fast that we were soon nearly as big as the cat. I remember one time my brother ran after the old cat for his breakfast, and she didn't want him to have any, but he was so big and strong that he rolled over her and thought he was surely going to get his breakfast. The old cat began to spit and scratch and bite at him, and my brother ran away as fast as he could. After that, neither one of us ever got another meal from that old cat, because when we came near her, she would box our ears, and if we tried to get anything to eat, she would scratch and bite us. After that, we got very hungry, but finally the boy bought a rubber nipple at the store and put it on an old bottle he found in the house. Then he filled the bottle with milk and gave it to my brother. and you would have laughed to see that little 'coon sit up, just like a little boy, and hold the bottle up to his mouth and suck and suck and suck, until all the milk in the bottle was gone. And then when the bottle was empty, the boy Ray filled it again and gave it to me, and I did the same thing. After that, 2 or 3 times every day, this boy would give us a bottle of milk, just as he would feed a little baby, and we ate and grew, until the first thing we knew, we were full grown and almost as large as a dog. One day, my brother and I saw some chickens out in the backyard. We never had eaten anything in our lives but milk, but the first thing we knew, we found ourselves running after a chicken, and we caught it and killed it, and ate it all up. And the boy came out and found us all covered with feathers. He scolded us like everything. He said that that was his little pet chicken that he wanted to keep always, a beautiful white Betam. And after that, he put us in a cage until he got a chain. And ever since that time, we have either been in a cage or had a chain around us to keep us from killing chickens or doing things that people did not want us to do. Finally, a man came along and saw us and said he wanted to put us in the circus, and the boy sold us to the man, and that is how we got acquainted with all the other animals. We have been very happy and contented all our lives, because men have always given us all we wanted to eat, and taken good care of us. And while we are glad now that we can climb trees and run around the woods, still we remember that the men were very kind to us. As the little cub bear went off to bed, he said, "Well, I guess that is the best way, to be caught before you are big enough to know anything about the woods and the mountains and the hills." And the 'coon said, "That is true." The next day the monkey was telling the little cub bear about the chariot races they had in the circus, how the men would hitch up 4 beautiful snow-white horses to one chariot, and 4 coal-black horses to another chariot, and then race around and around the track in the circus, and how everybody in the circus would be as excited as could be. The little cub bear said, "Why can't we have a race? You know the 4 beautiful black horses are down at the foot of the mountain, in a little valley, and the 4 snow-white horses are down at the foot of the mountain, in another valley. Perhaps we can get them up here and run a race. I will drive one chariot." And then the monkey said, "You never learned how to drive horses." "I learned how in the circus." But the little cub bear was a very brave little bear, and he said he would try anyway. So the next morning they went to see if they could get the horses to come up and run the chariot race. Jumbo saw them, and asked where they were going. The monkey told him, and Jumbo said that was fine. He would be very glad to act as judge of the race, and that he would go halfway down the mountain and draw a line, and that the first one to get over the line would win the race. So the monkey went down and told the black horses and the white horses what they wanted, and they all agreed that it would be great fun to come up and run a race, just as they used to in the circus. So they all came up to the den, and they were the most beautiful horses you ever saw. It took the monkey a long while to hitch up the horses. The bears helped him all they could. All 4 of the white horses were hitched to one of the red and gold chariots, and the 4 black horses were hitched to the other red and gold chariot, and the monkey chose the white horses, and the little bear chose the black horses. The monkey got into his chariot and took the reins, and little cub bear climbed into his chariot and took the reins, and looked over to see how the monkey held them, and he tried to hold them up the same way. Then the monkey said, "How are we going to know how to start, so we can both start together?" And the circus bear said, "I will tell you what to do. We will get the beaver to slap his tail on the water, and that will be just as good as firing a pistol. When you hear the noise, you both start at the same time." So the muskrat ran down and told the beaver what to do, and little cub bear and the monkey waited, all ready to start the moment they heard the noise. Soon there was a sharp bang, and the horses all started, just as though they had been shot out of a gun. The cub bear let go the reins the first thing, and just hung on to the chariot for dear life. The monkey looked over and laughed. The black horses were getting ahead of the white ones, for they were running downhill at a terrible rate. Papa Bear came out of the cave just then, and he was dreadfully frightened, because he felt that his little cub bear would surely be killed. But the horses had run so many times that they were not afraid at all. They were going like the wind. First the white horses would be a little ahead, and then the black horses would be a little ahead. The little cub bear hung on as tight as he could, and he looked straight ahead of him. Suddenly he saw a stump right in the way ahead. The horses saw it at the same time, and 2 of the horses went on one side of the stump and 2 on the other, and the chariot ran right into the stump and swung him on top of his back. And just as he caught the monkey by the tail, the bear rolled across the line, and the other wheel rolled down the hill the other way, and 2 of the black horses went in one direction, and 2 of the black horses went in the other direction, and the bear went right up in the air. When his papa looked to see what had happened, he saw him come down just like a rubber ball, all rolled up, and he rolled on down the hill. And just when the monkey thought he surely would win the race, he saw a great stone ahead of him, and 2 white horses went on one side of the stone and 2 white horses on the other, and the chariot ran smash right into the stone, and 2 white horses ran in one direction and 2 white horses ran in the other direction, and one chariot wheel rode down the mountain one way, and the other chariot wheel rode down the mountain the other way, and the monkey went right up in the air, just as though he had been shot out of a gun. The elephant was standing at the line, and just as the monkey flew past him in the air, he reached out and caught hold of the monkey's tail with the thumb and finger on the end of his trunk. He saw a great stone ahead of him, and 2 white horses went on one side of the stone and 2 white horses on the other, and the great big rubber ball, and that was the end of the race. The elephant never could make up his mind which won the race, the monkey or the bear. Which one do you think won the race? End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of the Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bear Family at Home by WILBUR. Chapter 18. The animals plan how they will defend themselves against the circus men. One night the animals were all seated around in the beautiful cave, wondering why the men had not come to take them back to the circus. And they all said that if the men came they never would go. And the lion said that if a man came to get him, he would just hit him one terrible blow with his paw, and if that didn't kill him, he would just take the man's head in his mouth and bite as hard as he could, and that would be the end of the man. And then the tiger said that he would hide in the old dead tree where the owl sat, and when the man came, he would jump on him and bite him and scratch him until there was nothing left of him. And then the leopard said that if the man came, he would hide in another tree farther down, and he would wait, and when the man got right under the limb, he would jump on him and bite him, and scratch him until nothing was left of him. Then the kangaroo spoke up and said, "If the man gets after me, I will run as fast as I can, and if he is on horseback and gets near me, I will take my little kangaroo by the tail and throw him away out in the weeds, where they can't find him at all, and then I will go faster and faster." The little cub bear said, "Suppose he should catch you in a corner, where you couldn't get away. What would you do?" The kangaroo said, "I would stand on my hind legs, and I would wait until he came right up close, and when he got close to me, I would just strike out with my sharp 3-cornered claws, and if he got too near they would cut him just like a knife, and I guess that man would think that he didn't want any more kangaroo." Then the rhinoceros said that if he saw a man coming and couldn't run away, he would get right up close to him and stamp on him and bite him, and that he might use that long horn on the end of his nose to toss him up in the air. Old Jumbo said, I would just take that man by one leg and throw him up in the air so high that when he came down there wouldn't be anything left of him. And if there was anything left, I would step on him and run my tusks into him, and I guess he wouldn't want any more elephant." Then the beaver said he would swim under the water so that nobody could see him, and he would get right under his house, and come up through the little hole that was in the bottom of his house under the water, and hide, and they wouldn't know where he was. And the badger said he would get in a hole and hide, and all the other animals told what terrible things they would do to this man when he came to try to take them back to the circus, because they all said they would rather live out in the open air under the trees and in the beautiful cave than to be taken back to the circus. And when they all had finished, the little bear said, "Well, I am glad I am not the man, because I wouldn't want to be killed in so many different ways." While they were talking, they heard a bang, bang, and the little cub bear ran to the mouth of the cave. And what do you think he saw? A three-legged bear. He called the papa bear, and when he came to the mouth of the cave, he saw that the poor bear looked tired out and very thin. But soon he saw that it was Jimmie Bear, his own son that had been away for so long a time from home. So he called the mama bear and the circus bear and said, come quick, here is little Jimmie Bear, and he is coming back home." The old owl said, "Woo, woo," just as if he had not heard that it was little Jimmie Bear, but no one paid the slightest attention to the owl. They were all so glad that Jimmie Bear was home again. As soon as he came to the mouth of the cave, the papa bear gave him a great big bear hug, and the mama bear gave him a great big bear hug, and the dear little cub bear gave him a great big bear hug, at least as big a hug as a little bear could give, and that was much harder than you can hug, you know. Of course, the papa bear wanted to know all about Jimmie Bear, and Jimmie Bear said that he would tell him how he happened to go away from home and to be gone so long. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of the Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 19. Jimmie Bear's Story. You remember that when I was a little bear, one day I disobeyed my papa. Papa told me that he did not want me to go far away from home that day, because there were some great grizzly bears coming, and they might want to take a little brown bear away with them, if they should happen to see him playing away from his home. I thought that I would be very careful, for I loved my papa and my mamma very much, and I did not want to be taken away by a great grizzly bear. But I was interested in running around, and I thought I would try to see how far I could run without getting tired. So I ran and ran, on and on, for a long time. And before I knew it, I was several miles from home, and I began to grow tired. Of course, I remembered at once what my papa had told me, and so started home without waiting for anything. Before I had gone very far, I looked at the ground, and I saw that some very large animal had come that way. The tracks looked like great bear tracks, and though I had never seen the tracks of a grizzly bear, I thought that these had been made by the great grizzly that Papa had told me about. Of course I was sorry that I had been so careless and forgetful. I wanted to get home without seeing the great grizzly, and just as quickly as I could, I went another way. But before I had gone far, I heard a sound that made my heart go pit-a-pat, for it sounded like a great grizzly bear, and before I could think what to do, the grizzly had caught me and told me that he was going to take me a long, long way into the woods. I asked him to let me go back to the cave to say goodbye to Papa and Mama, but the grizzly bear said that he had not time to let me go, and besides that, if both the Papa Bear and the Mama Bear should try to keep me, he might have trouble in getting me, even if he were bigger than both of the bears put together. So he took me into the faraway land that I am going to tell you about. It is a beautiful land, and there are the most beautiful trees there, and many, many caves where bears could live. I learned to love the land very much, and when I grew up, I married the most beautiful brown bear in the whole world, and we have 4 of the dearest cubs that you ever saw. But I always wanted to see Papa Bear and Mama Bear and Little Cub Bear and Johnny Bear. So I have come back, and it is a dreadful journey across a desert. There is no water to drink, and nothing to eat, and, as you see, I nearly died. The animals all wanted to go and see the beautiful land that the 3-legged Jimmie Bear told them of, but they were afraid to go for fear that they might die of thirst. While they were wondering how they would cross the desert, they suddenly heard a loud bang, bang, and the little cub bear ran to the mouth of the cave. He said, "I see some very strange animals. They have the funniest necks, almost as long as the giraffes, but curved instead of straight, and their heads are very different from the giraffe. The animals have long hair on their necks, and on their backs they have 2 hills, small ones of course, and they walk very quietly. You can scarcely hear the animals when they place their feet on the ground." Just then the old owl said, "Hoo, hoo," but the animals did not answer. The circus bear said that he knew what the animals were. They were camels. "How many of them are there?" asked the circus bear, and the little cub bear began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, until he had counted 12 camels. When the camels came to the cave, the circus bear told the little cub bear to tell them to come in. The camels came in, but they said they were not in the habit of living in caves. They lived on the desert. "How can you live on the desert when there is no water to drink and nothing to eat there?" asked the little cub bear. The oldest of the camels replied that the camel was a very strange and peculiar animal, and they were made so that they could live on the desert, where there was nothing to drink and nothing to eat. Of course, the little cub bear wanted to know how it was possible for an animal to live without anything to eat, and with nothing to drink. But the camel told him that they had a place to carry water and a place to carry food. He had 10 stomachs for water, and 4 stomachs for food. The little cub bear thought a while, and then said that it seemed to him that if the camels could live so long on the desert, it would be easy for them to get to that new place where the Jimmie Bear lived. The old camel said that it would be very easy, and that the camels would take not only themselves, but that they could carry some of the other animals, for they were used to carrying big loads. That was why the men wanted them. They used the camels instead of the freight trains. So it was agreed that the little cub bear and some of the other animals should ride on the camels' backs, and that they would take turns riding. They would start at once, as soon as the camels had a good chance to take a big drink of water and fill all 4 of their stomachs with food. But the camels said, "You must be sure that you do not stick your sharp claws into our backs." The bears all agreed with the animals that they would be very careful, and not dig their claws into the camels. So they soon started. All of the animals ate and drank all that they could hold. The little bear cub was to ride all of the time, for he was so small and so weak. The 3-legged bear, too, was to have a ride most of the way, for he was very tired, and had come so long a journey with only 3 legs. The lion said that he thought he could walk most of the way. He was used to the desert, and the camel said he was very glad that the lion was going to walk, for his claws were very sharp, and he was afraid that the lion might forget and stick his sharp claws into his back. Well, you would have laughed to see the little cub bear try to get on the camel. The sly old camel knew that the little cub bear could not climb up, but the little fellow was in such a hurry to start that the camel let him try to get on the best way he could. Finally, the little fellow said, "Dear old camel, please tell me how to get on your back." Then the camel said, "Why didn't you ask me before? There is only one way that you can get on the back of a camel. I will kneel down and show you." But as soon as the camel knelt down, the little bear saw at once that he could get on his back, and he scrambled up and said, "Get up, Mr. Camel." The camel got up, But it was a very funny way that he did it. When the camel straightened out his hind legs, the little cub bear nearly fell off. Then the camel gave his hind legs another hump to get them real straight. And what do you suppose happened to the cub bear? He fell off and got a great bump on the ground. But it did not hurt him very much, and the camel tried it again. This time the little cub bear managed to stick on. The tiger, the kangaroo, the 2 rats, the ant bear, and the leopard all got on the camels. The hippopotamus tried to get on a camel, but it looked so odd that all of the animals laughed, and told him that he would have to walk anyway, because he was too big to ride on the back of a camel. The hippopotamus said that he thought he would stay in the lake the beaver had made, that he would not go far from water, for he liked to live in the water all of the time. The beaver said that he was going to stay too, and that if any of the men came, the hippopotamus could hide under the water, and he could go into his little house and stay there out of sight until the men had gone away. So they had to leave the beaver and the hippopotamus behind, but they all said that sometime they would come again to see the hippopotamus and the beaver, the badger, the giraffe, and all of the other animals started on their long journey to that land where the wife and the little cubs of Jimmie Bear lived. That night they were all very tired, and they had to lie down to sleep without anything to eat or any water to drink, all except the little cub bear, who had some berries in a pail that he had carried on the camel's back. Little cub bear wanted them all, but he thought, "Poor papa has walked all day, and has had nothing to eat or to drink, and the way was very hard." The little cub bear was very hungry and very thirsty, hungrier and thirstier than you have ever been. But he said, very sweetly and very politely, "Papa, you may have some of my berries." But the papa bear said that he would not take any of them. Then the little cub bear offered some of the berries to the mama bear, but she would not take any of the berries. He offered some to the circus bear, and the circus bear would not take any. Then he offered some to Jimmie Bear, and Jimmie Bear took just one. Then the little cub bear offered some to all of the animals, but no one would take any, except the baby kangaroo. I rather think that the baby kangaroo would have taken all of them, but his mama would let him have only 3. So the little cub bear had all the rest of the berries, and they tasted ever so much better than they would have tasted if he had not been willing to share them with the other animals. Don't you think they did? The next morning the animals started and traveled all day. That night, just as it was getting dark, they came to the edge of the terrible desert, and they saw a little stream of water and plenty of things to eat, and there they stayed that night. In the morning they started again, and soon came to the most beautiful trees, and grass, and flowers that they had ever seen. And Jimmie Bear pointed up to a cave on the mountainside where his wife and little bears were. And right there were 3 of the cutest little bears that you ever saw playing in the sun. What a noise they made when they saw their papa and all of the other animals. The mama bear ran to the mouth of the cave, and how happy she was to see Jimmie. The animals were all as happy as could be in the beautiful forest. And what do you think the little bears of Jimmie Bear called the little cub bear? They called him Uncle Cub. That night the cub bear teased the circus bear to tell him stories. "I want you to tell me a story about the time you took a ride in a great boat." And the circus bear said, "I will tell you a story about the time we crossed the great ocean and went over to another land." End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 20. How the Circus Crossed the Ocean. You may not believe it, little cub bear, because there is so much land, so many trees and rocks, and so little water where we are. But 3/4 of the whole world is covered with water, and I am going to tell you about the time that I crossed the ocean. The circus was in a great city, the men said it was New York. And one day, without our knowing anything about it, they rolled the big wagons down on the wharf where there was a great ship lying. This ship was as large as a dozen houses all put together, as large as the circus tents all put together, but a different shape, of course. And then we saw that all the men that belonged to the circus were on board the ship. They began to wheel the wagons on board and took the animals out, one at a time, and put them in great cages on board the ship. When it came time to put Jumbo on the ship, he didn't want to go. And how do you suppose they got him on board? They put great straps under him, and then they lowered a great rope from one of the masts and fastened it into the strap, and they started the engine going. And the first thing Jumbo knew, he was hanging in the air like a little toy elephant, and he waved his trunk around wildly and kicked his legs, but it didn't do him a bit of good. And then they hoisted him way up in the air as high as a house, and then they swung him right over and lowered him clear through 2 or 3 decks, way down to the bottom of the ship, and there they found a place for him. Then they brought back the straps and put them around the hippopotamus, and they lifted him away up in the air and swung him over, and lowered him way down into the bottom of the ship. And then they raised the camel and the rhinoceros in the same way. But the lions they brought aboard, cages and all, after all the animals were on board, and all the people belonging to the circus were on board. We heard a great gong ring, and then the big engines began to turn, and the ship began to move. The engine didn't go choo-choo like a locomotive, and there was no sound except throb, 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 which kept up until we were clear across the ocean, all day and all night, and the great ship quivered as the engine throbbed. But this wasn't the worst of it. We hadn't gone very far, until everything began to move. The cages went up and down, and up and down, and up and down, until I got dizzy, and all the other animals seemed to be dizzy. Then I felt so dreadfully, dreadfully sick, that I didn't want to move or say anything to anybody, or look at anybody, or think of anything. Once I opened one eye and looked out, and I saw that the men were lying around just in the same way that the animals were, and they looked awfully white and sick, and they didn't say anything to anybody, and they didn't want anything to eat, and we didn't want anything to eat. And I spent all my time wishing that the old boat would stop rocking and pitching and turning and twisting all the time, and the old ship would go down, 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 and just as soon as we would get used to its going down, 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 it would turn and go up, 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 and just as soon as we got used to its going up, 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 it would turn and go down, down, down again. And when the ship started up, my stomach wanted to stay down, and when the ship would start down, it seemed as though my stomach wanted to stay up, and so I got terribly sore on the inside, and all the other animals seemed to be terribly sore. I hugged myself as hard as I could to keep from coming to pieces, and I saw all of the other bears hugging themselves. All the animals were lying down looking sleepy. Everybody seemed to be sleepy, except some of the men who were dressed in blue. They ran about and whistled and sang and blew tobacco smoke in our faces, and this made us feel terribly sick. But they seemed to be having a splendid time. After a while I learned that these were the sailors, and that they didn't mind the ship going up and down all the time. After a while we all got so that we didn't mind it much, and then we began to eat. It seemed as though we never would get enough. We ate and ate and ate. We ate more than enough to make up for all the time when we didn't eat anything, and some people who looked so pale and so sick and so weak seemed to eat and eat and eat, and some of them got so fat before we got to the other side of the water that you would hardly have known them. One day the ship pitched and tossed and rolled worse than it ever had, and for some reason the engine stopped. I heard a man say that something was broken, and as soon as the engine stopped, it just seemed as though that old ship would go to pieces. She rose higher and went lower, and one time there was a great splash, and the biggest lot of water you ever saw came right down where the animals were. The hippopotamus thought it was fine until he tasted the water, and then he made up the most awful face you ever saw. And you can imagine what kind of a face it was, for he is homely enough anyway. His nose is bigger than his face, and his mouth is right on the end of his nose. I asked him what the trouble was, and he said it wasn't the kind of water he liked. It tasted of salt and was bitter. It made him feel as though he never wanted to eat anything again as long as he lived. I noticed, though, that the seal and the walrus seemed to enjoy it ever so much. I asked them why, and they said that this was the kind of water they liked. That was the kind of water they had always lived in, salt water. It seemed a long time, but after a while the engine started up again. Then the ship was more quiet, but it kept going up and down, and up and down, until we got clear across the water, and then we noticed that the deck we were on became as quiet and steady as a floor. I heard one of the sailor men say that we were coming into a harbor, and sure enough, we soon stopped, and the men began to take the animals out again. They hung the elephant on the end of a long rope, with straps around him, just as they had before, and the camel, and the hippopotamus, and the rhinoceros, and they took us all out and put us on a train. Everything looked so green and nice. How glad we were to be on shore! But we couldn't understand anything the men said, because they all talked a different language. It sounded like jabber, 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 mum, mum, mum. I asked the lion, who had been in the circus longest, what it meant. He said we were in a new country, where everybody talked a different language, and that there were lots of other countries where they talked other languages. We stayed in this new country a long while, but finally came back, and that is the end of my story. The little cupbear said, I would like to see the ocean, but I don't think I would ride on a ship if it makes me feel so terribly bad inside. And the circus bear said, you would soon forget all about that and just remember the beautiful things there are to see. I am glad I went across. Then the little cub bear went to bed and went to sleep. And that night he dreamed so hard that, what do you think happened to him? He rolled clear out of bed and fell into a stream in the cave. Kerplash! The papa bear asked him what the trouble was, and he said he dreamed that he was on board ship and was nearly drowned. Some dreams, you see, come true. When morning came, the papa bear called the little cub bear to him and said, Now, my little cub, it is time for you to go out alone, to see if you cannot find something to eat for yourself. I think if you go and search carefully, you will be able to find some strawberries, and if you cannot find strawberries, you may be able to find some blackberries. Don't try to eat any of the gooseberries that you will see, because the wild gooseberries you will find are all covered with stickers, and they will stick in your tongue. If you find a tree filled with honey, come back and tell Papa Bear, because I think you had better not try yet to get the honey out of the tree, for the bees might sting you. And if you find any bumblebees, be sure to let them alone, for they have holes in the ground, where they make their honey, and they have very long stingers, and they would sting you very hard. so you better come home at once and tell Papa. But if you find the berries, you can eat all you want. And if you find a big patch of berries, you better come home and tell Mama Bear. And then we will all go and get all the berries we want to eat. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisabeth, Holland. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 21. Out All Alone. So the little cub bear started out for the very first time in his life all alone, and he did enjoy everything so much. He finally found a patch of berries, and there he ate all he wanted, and then he went over behind a log and lay down and went to sleep. When he awoke, it was nearly dark, and he knew that he must hurry home. He started, but had only gone a few steps when a little animal scampered across the path and ran up a tree. The cub bear thought he would like to see this animal, and so he climbed up the tree after it, and there he found a strange-looking animal. It had a tail something like a rat, but it was a great deal bigger than a rat, and bigger than a cat. It had long, soft fur, but as soon as the little cub bear touched it, it rolled itself into a ball and fell to the ground. Cub bear clambered down the tree as fast as he could, and there at the foot of the tree he found this strange animal all rolled up like a ball. The cub bear smelt of it and rolled it over very carefully and looked it all over, but it seemed to be dead. And he felt so sorry to think that this little animal was dead. And when he went home, the first thing he told his papa was, "Papa Bear, I saw the strangest little animal today, and I am very sorry that I killed it." Then he told the Papa Bear how the little animal scampered up the tree, and how it rolled up into a furry ball, and how it dropped from the tree and seemed to be dead. The Papa Bear said, "My dear little cub bear, the animal was not dead at all. That was just his way of fooling you and making you think that he was dead, so that you would not bother him any more. The animal was an opossum. That is the way they always do when they are frightened, or when they think someone is going to take them and hurt them." Then the little cub bear told his papa what a fine time he had had, and how he had found the berries, and had eaten all he could, and that he was nearly ready to go to sleep. Next morning, bright and early, the Papa Bear called the little cub bear again, for he wanted to teach him that he must work for himself and find his own living. And he said, "Little cub bear, do you want to go again into the woods today and see if you can find some more berries?" And the little cub bear said, "Yes, Papa, I want to go, because I want to learn to work for myself and take care of myself." So the Papa Bear again told him to be very careful, and if he saw any men or any large animals, he was to come home as quickly as possible. The little cub bear said that he would do this, and then he started out joyously in the early morning light while dew was on the ground to see if he could not find another berry patch. And sure enough, before he had gone very far, he found a patch full of beautiful blackberries. He ate all he could of these, but he got scratched many times on his nose and on his paws. It did not hurt him any on his paws, because they were thick, but on the end of his nose, where the skin was very thin, sometimes the little cub bear was so badly scratched that he felt like crying. But he was a brave little fellow, and did not cry, and thought that as soon as he had enough to eat, he would go back and tell the Papa and Mama Bear where they could find all they wanted to eat. Pretty soon he left the berry patch thinking he would go home a new way, and so he started and very soon came to a beautiful lake, larger than the lake that the beaver had made near the den where they used to live. It was so wide at some places that he could hardly see across the lake. It was one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, and the most beautiful lake that this little cub bear had ever seen. The little cub bear sat down near a log to look at this lake, for it made him very happy and contented to see such a beautiful sight. While he was waiting, he saw in the air a very large bird, larger than a hawk and larger than an eagle. This bird seemed to be flying about over the water, and around, and the little cub bear wondered what this bird was trying to do. The most peculiar thing he noticed about the bird was that he had such a long bill. The bill was over a foot long, much larger than the bill of the ostrich, and larger than the bill of a goose, or any bird that the little cub bear had ever seen. All of a sudden, this peculiar bird turned a sort of somersault and fell head downward into the water. While falling, the bird's wings were outstretched, and when it struck the water, there was a great splash, and the bird disappeared, but soon reappeared floating on the surface and shaking his head in a most peculiar way. The little cub bear wondered and wondered what the bird was doing. He waited until this strange bird began flying again, and then he noticed that there were a number of other birds which looked just like this one, and that they were flying about. And every once in a while one of these birds would turn a sort of a somersault and fall with outstretched wings into the water with a great splash, and then come up, and always bob his head in just that peculiar way, as though he were nodding at someone. The little cub bear thought that when he got home he would tell the papa bear about it, and try to find out what kind of bird it was. So he hurried and got home just as the sun set. And when his papa asked him how he got along that day, he told him about the blackberry patch, and said that he hoped they would all go the next day and get something to eat, for there were plenty of berries for all the bears, and for any of the other animals who wanted to eat the berries. The lion and the tiger both said that they did not care for berries, and the hippopotamus, too, said that he did not want any berries. The rhinoceros did not care for berries, but all the birds and the monkey thought it would be fine to go and get some of the berries the next day. Then the little cub bear said, "Oh, Papa, I almost forgot. I want to tell you about the strange bird that I saw today at a big lake in the mountains. It was bigger than a hawk or an eagle. The bird had a long bill and circled around, and then turned a somersault and fell with outstretched wings, kersplash, into the water. And then the bird came up and shook his head as though he were nodding to a friend." The papa bear said, "Why, I know what that was. That was a pelican. And if you had been nearer to him, you would have seen a strange bag under his bill." The little cub bear said, "Well, what was he nodding his head about when he came up out of the water?" And the papa bear said, "You see, the pelican dived into the water to get a fish, which he saw when he was flying about above the water, and he dove down into the water so straight that he caught the little fish in his bill, and put it in the pouch under the bill before the little fish could get away. And then, when he came to the surface, he was nodding his head so he could throw his bill up into the air and try to get the fish down his throat." Then the papa bear said that one time he saw a pelican swallow the head of a fish that he had found on the beach at the seashore. And this head was larger than 2 baseballs. And when the pelican got the head halfway down his throat, it stuck there. And the poor pelican was in great distress, for he could not get the fish's head up or down. The papa bear said he did not know what happened to the pelican, for at that time 2 men came up, and the papa bear had to leave as fast as he could. But he thought perhaps these men might have helped the pelican to get the fish's head in his throat, either up or down. The little cub bear said, "I think it was very foolish of the pelican to try to swallow something so big without knowing whether he could get it down or not." The papa bear said, "You see, we never can tell what we can do until we try, and that is a good way to learn, if we are careful enough about our trying." Again the next morning the papa bear called the little cub bear very early and told him that he would like to have him go out again that day, and that if he would be very careful he could go farther than he had ever gone before. So this time the little cub bear went a long, long way, and came to a place he had never been before, either with his papa or without him. And there was a great oak tree, And he saw high up in this tree little squirrels running about on the limbs of the trees, with their bushy tails over their backs. And the little cub bear, after he had found something to eat, came back and watched the squirrels. And he saw that they were gathering nuts and carrying them in their little paws into holes in the top of the tree. He noticed, too, that sometimes these little squirrels would sit on the end of the limb, just as the coon did, and take in their little forepaws a nut and bite through the shell of the nut very quickly and get out the meat and eat it. He thought this was very, very nice, but he wondered why they did not eat all the nuts and why they took some of them in the hole of the tree. So that night, when he returned home, he talked to his papa about the little squirrels he had seen that day, with their beautiful bushy tails curling up over their backs, and their bright little eyes, and their sharp little teeth, and soft fur. Then he said, "Papa, why did the little squirrels take some of the nuts into the hole in the tree?" Papa Bear told him that it was because they were saving the nuts for the winter, when the snow was on the ground and there were no nuts to be had, and that the little squirrels spent all the winter time inside the tree where it was warm and cozy, and that whenever they were hungry they had this store of nuts to eat, and that the little squirrels seemed to know whether it was going to be a long, hard winter or whether the winter was going to be mild, and that they knew just how many nuts to put away for the winter, whether it was short or long. When it was night time, the little cub bear cuddled up in a ball and said, "Papa, I want you to tell me a story before I go to sleep about the inside of a nice warm tree where the squirrels live." And so the Papa Bear told this story. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elisabeth, Holland. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. Chapter 22. The Papa Bear's Lullaby. Once there was a big black Papa Bear, and he had a little black cub bear. They lived in the woods a long way from anyone. The Mama Bear had gone to the bear heaven, and so they lived alone. One night, as it was getting very, very cold, the Papa Bear went a long, long way to find something to eat for the little bear, and he walked and walked until he was very tired, but he could not find anything to eat, for the snow had come and covered the ground, and all the berries were gone. The Papa Bear grew more and more tired. He was so tired that as he walked, his eyes would close, and he could not keep them open, and his head would nod so sleepily. But he kept on, hoping that he would soon find something to eat for his little cub bear. So he walked and he walked. His eyes closed. He was so sleepy, sleepy, sleepy. Soon he started home and walked and walked and walked until he met the little cub bear who had come out to meet him. And he said, "Dear little cub bear, I am so sleepy that I cannot keep my eyes open at all." And the little cub bear said, "I am so sleepy that I cannot keep my eyes open at all." Then the Papa Bear said, "I am going to find you a nice place to sleep." So they walked and walked and got sleepier and sleepier until they came to a great hollow tree. Way up at the top of the tree was a hole large enough for the little cub bear to get in. The Papa Bear told the little cub to climb up the tree and go in the hole and see if there was a good place in the tree to sleep. The little cub did as his papa told him to. He climbed up and up until he came to the hole in the top of the tree. And then he looked into the hole to see if there was a good place in the tree for him to climb down on the inside. The little cub bear turned around and backed into the hole, and soon the Papa Bear could see nothing of the little cub bear, for he was inside the tree. But he could hear him scratch as he slid down on the inside of the tree. The Papa Bear listened as he stood outside of the tree on the ground, and he could hear the little cub's claws. scratch, scratch, scratch. And he listened again, and he could hear the little cub bear's claws scratch, scratch, scratch. And he listened again, but he couldn't hear anything. And he listened, and he couldn't hear anything. And he wondered and wondered where the little cub was. So he listened again. This time he heard a faint sound just inside the tree, and he knew that the little cub bear was clear down inside the tree at the bottom. The papa bear said, "Go to sleep, dear little cub." The little cub lay down in the bottom of the hollow tree and curled up into a little ball and closed his eyes. It was a nice, warm, soft, sleepy place. And the papa on the outside heard the little bear lie down, and so he listened and listened. And soon he heard the softest little snore, just the softest snore. And then the papa bear went a little farther and found another hollow tree, and he climbed up and up until he came to a big hole in the top of the big tree. And he backed into the hole and scratched his way down and down inside the hollow tree until he came to the bottom. And then he rolled himself up into a big black ball so snug and warm and went to sleep. He snored so quietly, and the little cub bear and the papa bear slept all winter long in the cozy warm hollow trees. But once in a while the papa bear would climb up and up out of the tree and go over to the little cub's tree and listen. And he would hear the faintest little snore, so gentle. And then the papa bear would say, "Dear little cub, I love you," and pat the tree. Then he would go back to his own hollow tree. Up and up he would climb outside, and down inside, until he came to the nice warm place where his bed was. There he would curl up into a ball and shut his eyes and go to sleep, and snore and snore and snore all night and all day, and all night and all day, the whole winter long. And the little cub was asleep before the story was ended, for, you see, the story has no end. Afterward, many wonderful stories were told in the cave of Jimmie Bear, and many wonderful things happened to the animals there. But I think that we must say goodbye now to the dear little cub and to all of the animals. The end. End of Chapter 22. End of The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur.